Welcome to this special day. Thank you all for joining us to hear about the thing we all have in common, a passionate commitment for learning, and for sharing your knowledge with us and each other today. For over 30 years, Hauser Wirth has facilitated an artist-led program that began at a very modest scale in Switzerland and has evolved organically into a diverse international one. From the very beginning, learning has been at the core of what we all do, integral to our vision and our commitment since the early days of the gallery. It's central to our values, and as we have grown our team around the world, and most essential, our artists, who are the heart of everything we do, have taken up the mission. They are deeply involved in an ever more robust and original approach to learning. Their contributions inform what we do in all the cities where we work. We are ambitious about learning as a tool for the growth of communities, and we are proud to be. As you may have noticed, the word learning appears on the facade of this building. In our minds, that is simply another way to say welcome to everyone, to our neighbors, to educators, to students, curators, artists, to writers, and to interested members of the public. For us, learning is a critical way to ensure that great art and the ideas of the artists who make it can be shared with as wide an audience as possible. We believe that people of all ages, backgrounds and circumstances deserve the opportunity to engage actively with art. Many of you may know that I'm a trained arts and craft teacher. That was my profession before co-founding this gallery, which today I serve as a president alongside my co-presidents Ivan Wirth, my husband, and Mark Payo. And while I might not be teaching in a classroom now, my passion for learning has remained just as strong in everything that I do. When we first developed the gallery, education was part of our work. We developed publications from the very start as a way to extend the impact of art beyond our exhibitions. And we always made space to host talks and events to achieve the same in a different medium. From there, we learned by doing, by actively trying ideas out in real time and creating new approaches for engaging different kinds of people. Or, as Ivan puts it, we've learned where to go by going. Now, 3 decades later, we have an international program for learning, and last year alone, we welcomed 150,000 participants in workshops, classes, and other dedicated activities. And so far this year, we have partnered with 38 non-profits and educational organizations and supported 21 learning charities. And our learning program is still growing and evolving. Which brings me to today, and to thanking you all for coming and to be here and explore together this inspiring and essential realm of learning. It's a pleasure to welcome you all. In this new space we inaugurated just a few weeks ago. In months and years to come, we hope to share it with as many educators as possible and to welcome as many people to our learning as possible. I also would like to thank the team based here in New York, who have worked so hard to prepare for this special day, especially Marisa Passi, our New York-based learning coordinator. I'm joined by Debbie Hillyerd, our Senior Director of Learning, who will chair the day for us. Every day is a school day. Have a great learning exchange.
Thank you, Manuela. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. As Manuela said, my name is Debbie, if you don't know me. It's amazing that so many of you are here. It felt a little bit like a party next door. Everybody already knew each other. So let's keep that as the spirit of the day. In addition, we have colleagues joining us by live stream. So welcome to all of you out there, wherever you may be. We feel your presence in the room, and we're really grateful to you for joining us today. We're grateful for that technology that allows us to reach as many people as possible. Today is about, I suppose, time to share experiences, to hear about other people's projects, to think about our ambitions for learning. New York, in the time, I've been in and out of New York now quite a bit for the last 2 years. And it's been a really amazing experience for me. I've met many of you, and I've learned a lot already. And what it has shown me is the rich, diverse, energetic, and creative attitudes that many of you have. And it's also made me realize of the volume of educationists that are out there, of innovative practitioners, of amazing charitable, and you call them non-for-profits, organizations. I am absolutely overwhelmed to see the support and the people who've joined us today. I'm really interested in the fact that actually this has been a forum that a lot of you have, welcomed and described that you haven't had the opportunity to take part in before. And for us today, this is an exchange, and we're going to share and have opportunities to talk and think about the things that we do, the role we play, and what we can learn from one another. I wonder what those conversations will bring. We have 4 amazing panels. I'll describe them in a minute. But will they reveal some of the principles that guide us? And will they kind of make us aware of some of the challenges, but hopefully mostly the rewards? Are we willing to share our secrets? What makes our learning program better, I'd love some, please. But it's about sharing and caring today, and it's about celebrating the really important work that we do that Manuela has just described as well. It's not a conference, and it's not a symposium, okay? This is an exchange. It's getting together. Everybody in this room and beyond is important. We want to hear from you. We have an amazing lineup of panelists to share this topic in the widest way. But we have breaks, we have lunch, we have a time at the end of the day. We encourage you to talk and exchange and get to know one another. For those of you who are joining us outside of this room, we have an email address, hwnylearning@hauserwirth.com. Please email us questions, your responses. We really want to hear from you. So we have 4 sections. We're going to kick off with a conversation between friends. Angel and José. What is it like to be an artist and also have a great friend who's an artist? We're going to have a great conversation between those two to really set the scene and remind us this is where it all starts. Secondly, we're going to meet Rika, Burnham and Adjoa Jones de Almeida and hear from the academics. Okay? What do they think about the gallery or the museum as a forum for dialogue, and what does that look like? After lunch, we will meet Jane South, Mickalene Thomas, and Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, both protagonists and recipient of the Pratt Forward programme, a really innovative idea to look at residencies for young artists setting out on their careers. And finally, Davinia Gregory Kameka, OreOluwa Badaki, and Filippa Christofalou. I knew I wouldn't be able to do this. Such a mouthful. Apologies, Filippa. Christofalou explore the relationship between more dynamic and contemporary and experimental forms of learning that are instigated by art and education in the gallery setting. We've shared an overview for the day with you on a digital form, so hopefully you all have that. That gives you a little bit more insight into all of our panelists, so you can learn a little bit more about them if you'd like to. It also talks about all of the amazing exhibitions we have opened, not least last night, in this city. So it was great to be in New York last night and see the energy in and out in every gallery in this area. And it's really exciting to think that we also all form a part of that energy in the work that we do. There'll be space for questions at the end of each of our panels. There'll be a brief handover between each where we can just swap around the stage and make sure our speakers are comfortable. Please make sure your phones are on silent. If you need to leave the auditorium during the event, it's probably best to do by the rear door. Our next break is for lunch. If you need the bathrooms, they're best accessed through the Roth Bar. This event is called Learning Exchange. Art Education Matters. Let's exchange some ideas. Let's learn from one another. Let's have some fun. Welcome, fellow educators. I'm looking forward to learning from you. Thank you. So, thank you, Angel. It gives me great pleasure to welcome José. I'm just going to kind of climb onto these seats. We're going to sit down. Ooh. Right, I'm on. Are you on?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It gives me absolute pleasure to welcome José Lerma and Angel Otero, who have kindly joined us to share, I don't know, this is kind of exciting, a little bit of a personal insight into a friendship. Sure. What does artist friendship look like? Angel's painting practice, I suppose, it plays with ideas of memory. It plays with art history. As well as his own lived experience. And what are these lived experiences that shape us as artists? And for his long-term friend, José Lerma, finding ways within painting to collapse sort of historical boundaries and the personal also drives his work. So for me, there's already synergies and interesting things, although their work looks so different. And above us, by the way, guys, we have a rolling carousel of images of their work. Some of you will be really familiar with José or Angel's work, and some of you might not. So at some point, it would be really nice if you could both look up and flag which is your work for people who might not. That would be really helpful. So what shapes the career path of an artist? And can we learn from how artists reflect on those experiences that they've had during that journey? What is that journey like? Is it a straight line? I doubt it. And who helped you make the right decisions along the way? Is there such a thing as the right decision? And how important is it to have a friend who's an artist? I can't wait to find out. So, we're going to find out. So, tell us when you two first met.
You start, José.
All right, so let's see. I'm a professor in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute, and at that point I was being hired. So they bring you in and to do studio visits, and they told me there's this undergrad here who's from Puerto Rico. You got to meet him. He's very talented. I go to the studio. He's not there. This is an advanced painting studio. It's about the size of this floor plan, tiny. And I saw paintings, his paintings from undergrad. And I was struck immediately because it's very advanced in terms of the surface. It's something you notice immediately with a good painter. Like they have not just the imagery, but the surface. So there was a lot of maturity there in this very concentrated area. What I later met him. Later I came back, I was hired, and I became his advisor. At that point, he was in graduate school. And his paintings, which had been, as I said, very seductive surfaces, but the imagery was not as striking as what I later saw. And what I saw later was just someone very adventurous, taking massive risks. At this point, and I should mention, this is pretty funny, he had just won this big prize. So I haven't seen this too many times, but he was the first student I ever saw that had a studio assistant in a tiny, tiny room. That'd be like a little, and you know, it could have been a kind of factory process. Instead, he was taking these insane chances with his work. I mean, it was very idiosyncratic, very striking, and maybe you want.
Yeah, I'll tell my version of meeting Jose. First of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hauser Wirth, for this opportunity. Thank you, and the whole team. This dear friend here, who I admire dearly. I met his work first through Michelle Grabner, who was my professor in Chicago, and I was in that program that Jose just mentioned, advanced painting, and she was obviously studying my work and giving me opinions and so on. And she's like, "Do you know Jose Lerma in Puerto Rico?" And I'm like, "No, I've never even heard that name," which made me really feel quite ignorant, because at the moment Jose was a quite known artist, not just in the island, but also showing quite actively here in New York and outside of New York. And I quickly, that afternoon, run to the computers in the library and search his name and his work, and I instantly, through the computer, right, for what I can absorb from what I was seeing, I quickly fell in love with his work. Like, he's mentioning quite often about the surface, the subject, the process. He was at that moment showing with a great gallery called Andrew Rosen Gallery back then. And I just became a little bit obsessed with just seeing this work. And at some point I have heard that he was going to give a talk at the Milwaukee Art Museum together with Tomaselli.
Yeah.
And who else was it?
Brad Calhammer.
Brad Calhammer.
Yeah.
And I took a megabus as a very groupie individual because I really wanted to meet this person. And I saw the lecture, a great talk, conversation. And at the end, I waited by the door to see if I can say hello, introduce myself. And I did, very nervous. And I said I was a big fan. I wanted to invite him a beer, that I was going to stay overnight in Milwaukee. We did not have that chance that day, but I was lucky enough to re-meet him sometime later, because he got accepted into the professor program at the school. And we started hanging out in Chicago a lot. And the first thing that really struck me, separate from his work, was him as an individual, as an artist, had such a unique way to engage in conversations about art, in a way that every time we left the conversation, either during the day or late at night at a bar, I will leave so hopeful, excited, as if I was the best artist in the world. And not just because he was giving compliments, he was just talking so many different subjects, questions, interests, challenges about painting, about art history. It was just so much to digest, but in a way that was very effective to me as a young art student. So over time, that friendship grew. Eventually, in grad school, I asked him to be my professor, which he was like, "Why you are asking me?"
We were already friends, so I was like, "Why are you wasting it? Get someone else."
Get somebody else. But I really wanted more time with him in this kind of context. And, Jose was bringing to the table a very interesting push about thinking outside the box when it came to painting. Painting not just as the medium, as a medium to translate a narrative or a story, but something way more complex. And he was pushing me to stay off my comfort zone, and that really helped me articulate what eventually became the process that I've been working since. But that was my introduction to Jose, and at this point we're actually neighbors out there.
Yeah.
I bought the house.
We live two houses next door. Yeah. Here's the weird part. So we went to the same school in Bayamon, Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
It's a tiny town. Well, it's not tiny, but it's far from, not in San Juan, not the place where you would expect. This little school, we were 10 years apart and had the same nun teach us art. And we met later, and we're like, oh, what the?
But you said it was actually really good for art.
She was actually really good.
Fantastic for art. Madre Maria Antonia, wherever you are.
Madre Maria Antonia.
I hope you're watching this. Maria Teresa, sir.
Maria Teresa.
Maria
Yeah.
Teresa.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, okay. So empowerment, inspiration, solidarity.
Yes.
But have you ever stolen or borrowed anything from one another?
I was the first to steal big time. I stole big time. To the point that was really embarrassing. Because it wasn't like I was trying to copy this friend of mine and his work. It was like I just kept looking so much at his work and trying to figure out so many things that I think it just got embedded in my head. And of many other ways José translates painting, one that I was really drawn to was that he had this unique way of applying the paint where he kind of pushed the brush in a way that kind of had the paint kind of stick out on the sides, and I liked it, so I wanted to try it. And at some point, I'm like, okay, maybe I can do just one of those brush strokes over here. I'm like, wow, that looks really cool. I'll do one more over here. And at some point, of course, you get so now, you get drawn away by your painting process. And I was having such a great time, and I stand back, and I'm like, it looks just like José, and he's about to come visit me in an hour. So I'm like, should I hide this painting? And as soon as he came through the door, I just didn't know what to say. I'm like, hey, there is some influence of your work here, but it's just, I'm just, I don't know, I'm trying to see how I fight that. And he was quite political about it, very respectful, and
I was just confused. It's not working for me. Why would you even try it?
But it was, and the idea of, how you bring it up, stealing something. I think, José, you can kind of phrase this in better words, because for any artist, but in painting, it's a very particular thing. When
people quote all the time, and I think it's part of our practice to have constant art references. I think the important part is that we pepper the whole thing with delving back into the personal, and that sort of makes the whole thing palatable. But yeah, I mean, it's a normal process, particularly with painters. It's kind of the beauty of it, But yeah, I mean, about the question, now I think it's a chronological thing. It's just because I was there first. I think had it been the other way around, because today we just constantly have conversations.
Yeah, we do.
About this. So, in a way, like he's teaching me now about a lot of things.
And can you say a little bit more about that then, what you're teaching one another?
Yeah,
well, I think different things. It comes from being very honestly opinionated about our practices, what we like, what we feel kind of weird about. And we can mock each other sometimes, things like, I wouldn't do that, blah, 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 blah. And, at the end is a conversation of when we distance each other and go back to our routines, we take a little something here and there with us, that we learn or that makes us think or rethink about what we're doing. Not just in art practice, but outside of it too, in terms of being in a relationship with galleries or working with curators, the whole field of being an artist. So it's definitely it's a back and forth learning thing for our friendship.
Well, I think most artists, they should have a person that's kind of a sounding board sometimes for these kind of things. There's a lot of, particularly in New York, you can talk shop all day long and just talk business, and it's almost embarrassing to bring up an idea. And it's good to have like this person that you can just, is this a stupid title? What's up with that?
That's interesting about that safety and that confidence,
Yeah.
But also something Angel just said about actually outside of making the work itself, painting teaches you so much more about life and how to navigate the world, in fact. I wondered if you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's quite a broad, and a very individualist answers to all of us. But, always have seen engaging with art like this bridge that we can kind of cross to take a pause of our routine and everyday life to just kind of engage, not just with, someone else's gift of that is given to us, but culturally, individualistic. And just see what we can learn from that, how we can respond, and what that adds to, our everyday life.
I mean, I think it's one of those mediums that it teaches resourcefulness and resilience. I mean, you can make a painting with just some mud on cardboard, and it can be just as great as some highly produced thing. And it takes a long time, so you have to keep working through this thing. It might take you 1,000 paintings to get to the one that cracks it. So those are all valuable lessons.
What does art teach you about life?
Oh man, you start with that one.
No, I think I think I stand in the same. For me, has been that bridge. Is individually. I think we all respond differently to what we stand in front of, or the experiences that we have, and what we can take out of that to apply to our thinking, to our everyday life. And for me, that's special, not just with art in terms of painting, but with books and everything that comes from the creative mind.
It's when you're in that sort of thinking, and let's call it an artist way of thinking, where you're open to connecting things that are not meant to be connected. And you're constantly sort of seeking out that potential, that charge that will come from something like that. And then once you put them together, they seem so natural. And if you're just open to that possibility, it enriches your life.
I was just thinking, was it Maria Teresa?
I think it was Madre Antonia.
Okay, Antonia. So I got it right the first.
Well,
It was a
something
long
with
time
Teresa.
ago, guys.
It was a very long time ago. Yeah, very long time.
if she didn't teach you your most important lesson, who did, and what was it?
Wow, I don't know. I think I have a couple of very important lessons, not just one. But I think in every stage of our lives, there's someone that becomes a bit of an icon in that stage, and you definitely learn something that you just carry for the rest of your life, and at some point even also translate it to family, friends, and just the world in some way. I don't think I have one specific one, but I feel very blessed to have had quite a group of those.
Yeah. No, I had two great teachers. This guy T.L. Solin and Michelle Grabner, who was the other teacher, and they were like my art parents, and they complemented each other really well. One was very romantic. One understood the art apparatus really well, and that's kind of all you need. I mean, I think Baldassare used to talk about what you need is really a community, and a couple of people to react. There's not, and that was greatly provided.
Interesting. We kind of create those communities. We attract those communities. We seek out those communities. It is interesting, and then it kind of comes back to the fact that you actually sounds like you simultaneously sort out one another. I just wondered for people in the room, and I'm going off piste here, because we have some images above us, whether you could just both look them up and comment at least maybe on an image by the other person.
This is a painting of my last show here in New York with Hauser Wirth. It was my first exhibition with them. It was a beautiful show. That's my homeboy over here. This is where, Jose?
This is in Los Angeles. This is a recent show.
And that's Hauser Wirth again, last November, actually. I'll never forget that day. Great show.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of the images you're seeing of mine some of them are early ones. I used to do a lot of installations and using carpet and other materials. And then the new paintings are much more like that kind of thing, which is I use massive brushes and I work with in ridiculous amounts of paint. So we both share this idea of materiality and in ways that would lend themselves to abstraction naturally, but we somehow stay in that representational camp. That's how we're very similar methodologically,
True.
and that's why our paintings don't look alike, paradoxically.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that before. That was really fascinating, and that could have been the draw that you were unable to articulate in those early days, you know? Yeah. Jose has an exhibition opening in Paris next week.
Next
Are
week.
you going?
I wish. No. I have to go back to Puerto Rico, but I'm sure it's going to look fantastic.
Yeah, I'm excited. First show in Paris, so it's always a good idea.
Okay. So before you were successful artists, what other jobs did you do?
Wow. I'll start this one. So I always loved working at a very young age. I actually remember my first job as 15 years old, I think it was, and I was an operator for messages for this little machine that was popular in the late 80s, early 90s called a beeper. So I would receive calls of people and send messages to other people. It was the most weirdest experience I've had ever. And then over that, I always have on and off jobs. Blockbuster Video was great because I was able to see some amazing foreign films in that job. But I would say the most odd job I've had was becoming an insurance agent. I became an insurance agent the day of my 21st birthday. My dad dropped me in front of the insurance commissioner, to take a test. And he told me, you need to pass this. And I passed it. And I made him very proud. I didn't make him too proud as a salesman. I was not that talented. Convincing people that they needed what I was selling. I was good at just being quite honest. Sometimes they had other quotes from other companies that were cheaper. And I will say, that is better. That is better.
You don't really need life insurance.
So after that, I recognized I was not doing well. Plus, I always was making art at night or when I had the opportunity. And it was just eating my mind, just the curiosity of what it is to become a full-time artist. So, I want to go to art school outside of my island. And at some point, very long story, but I received a letter from the School of the Art Institute offering me a scholarship through a professor. It was such a gesture. No professor of mine in college, when I drop out, wrote to them or called them, say, you need to approach this student of mine. And they did. And I ended up accepting that scholarship, and I moved to Chicago in 2003 or 2.
Yay to the teacher.
Yay. Yes. Wherever you are, too.
Yeah, I had the usual sort of art jobs for a bit. Worked on installations, and maybe I was an assistant briefly, and I worked in warehouses, that sort of thing. But I had a previous life. I went to law school. Before that, I was political science. I never studied art till I was 27. So I was pretty late when I started the whole thing. But I already had all this life experience. That's why whenever I meet students that come from other fields, I get excited because they can make art about something else, thank God. Yeah, I was in law school, and my last year, I was 4 classes shy when I switched to, I took an art class to relax, and then I freaked out. And just got a scholarship, stayed with it. But I worked for a clerk. I clerked for a judge, a federal judge, and he was very encouraging in telling me, you suck as a lawyer, you get out of here. So that was smart.
Okay, so we're on the subject now of kind of honest advice. What advice would you give to any artist starting out?
Well, for me, using my experience, I guess, it was curiosity was very important, questioning everything I was doing with obviously a mix of confidence to some extent, but just working and failing, it was part of the success, if that makes sense, and to some extent. Being aware of our history, being aware of your contemporary surroundings in the art and outside of the art in the world, just kind of putting everything out there. It really kind of took me to a position where I was able to find my voice, within my art. And when I have come across not just young, but any artist that is really striving to engage and be more present out there in the art world, we have these conversations. I usually have younger artists come help me in the studio, and apart from the amazing help they do, we engage in a lot of great conversations about their work, their questions about everything. And I think that's, has been very helpful in many ways, sure.
Yeah, I guess the most important thing is seek community when you're starting out. So that brings, that's a way of it also brings competition. It raises your game, and later you can isolate yourself. That's important later as well. What else? Blanking out, right?
Community is true. It was very important too, because it helped me engage in different opinions and thoughts. And there was in some of our peers, coming up as a student, that feeling also of feeling competitive to some extent,
right.
In a positive way. So yeah.
And I think the idea of just learning as much as possible, to sort of not isolate intellectually, and try to just learn as much as possible so you can unlearn it later. Because this is a business that really has no models. Everyone's sort of reinventing the way that it works constantly. That's why it's so different from other professions. Yeah.
Okay, you'll be pleased to know I've got one last question.
Yeah.
But then we're going to open it up to see if anybody has any questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
But our next panel is two museum educators. Leading museum educators, professionals with long careers, talking about gallery education. So I wondered whether you could tell me a little bit about your first experience of learning in an art gallery or museum, what that was like, when it happened. I don't know, be honest.
You mean at a younger age?
How old were you? Were you young when you first went to a museum or art gallery?
Okay.
And or did you appreciate it? Did you not?
I'll tell an anecdote that explains.
Go on.
I'm at university in New Orleans, and I decided to go to this museum. I've never been to a museum. I'm 21 years old already. And because in Puerto Rico, the main museum is on the south of the island. And it feels like even though it's a tiny island, it's worlds away. And I walk in, and there's an exhibition there's a Picasso painting that I had seen in a book. I was so ignorant that I asked the guard if this was the real one or just a copy. So that tells you, the sort of the huge gulf that even someone that was in university couldn't fathom that, So, yeah.
Yeah, for me was, I think, around 12 years old. I had begged my dad, who at the moment was divorced with my mom. So on that weekend, I needed to spend time with him. And I'm begged him, because I heard there's this place called museum where there's real art, or real serious art. And I wanted to see what was that about. And after a lot of begging towards that, he took me. He waited outside. He never went inside with me. So he stayed smoking outside. So I'm 12-year-old walking around the museum, and I came across a show that really, really struck me right away, and I will say was very iconic for the way I was thinking post that and my ambition post that. And it was a show by two contemporary artists of my island in Puerto Rico, Arnaldo Roche and Francisco Rodon. And it was my first time standing in front of what in my memory was the most biggest painting I've ever seen. Now I can remember it's just 6 foot tall, but it was just huge. It had a humongous accumulation of oil paint, which is a medium in the island that till today it's very expensive to buy art materials in Puerto Rico, extremely expensive. So I just, wow, this person is extremely rich. Or I just, and the work just struck me in terms of the construction of it, how this person made this. Like, what was the process? Like, it just seemed so impossible to be made. And that feeling just woke up such a curiosity of what it would feel to make something like this. So that museum visit really sparked a huge ambition to, like, just explore what it is, what is really art about, and making art. And, obviously that artist, years later, I had the honor to meet him and became his friend, and he passed away a few years back. But it was my first influence. I went back home. I remember when my dad brought me and my mom, and I quickly took some leftover house paints that my mom had, and he had a unique process of painting leaves and doing this sort of decollage. Is that what we call it? And
frottage and
frottage and decollage, and
fantastic.
And I
work.
tried it to do it on a paper, on stuff, and that visit that day really changed the route of my goals, for sure.
Amazing. It's been so exciting to hear from both of you. We've left very little time for anyone else to get a question in.
I know.
Apologies. Is anybody out there have a burning question they'd like to ask?
Or regular, doesn't have to burn.
Yeah. Thank you. We've got one down here, Marissa.
Hi, my name is Preston Fox. I'm the SMI coordinator at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I was just wondering, we talked about how expensive it was to paint, how there's a lot of barriers to becoming an artist. I'm wondering what it was like to really risk on yourself and bet on yourself. Someone who may be poor, someone who may be lacking the resources, how would they become a working artist?
Well, for me, it's, like you said, it was taking that risk and just trusting myself and my ambition, my dreams. And, as a student, I still was lacking a lot of financial to support the materials that I needed to create what I really wanted to make. Coming across some of painters in the school that had the resources to buy, for example, a brand like Williamsburg Paints, which is a paint that has such a great amount of pigments, rather than the more scholar kind of brands that I was able to afford. When I had the opportunity to buy at least one color of cadmium red that was like $100 a little bottle, you felt also a pressure, I guess, a mix of your confidence on yourself. I'm gonna take that risk, but I have the pressure, the same with the canvas. I'm like, I wanna buy now a 4-foot canvas, and you gesso it, and you just don't wanna mess it up, because this is the one big canvas you have. That pressure becomes an influence in the work, and I think, it's something that, even though it was my experience, I also try to communicate it when I come across people standing in the same position.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was because I'd done this law thing, and I had borrowed all this money, and now I wasn't going to be a lawyer. And I felt that I had failed at all these things. I kind of made a very romantic deal with myself, thinking, well, I'm going to jump off a bridge if I don't make this work or something. And that got me going.
Good question. Thank you. One last quick one, if anybody needs to. Well, leaves me to say thank you, guys.
Hey, it was beautiful. Thank you.
This was
all.
great.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We're into section 2 now, so welcome to Adjoa and Rika. Rika Burnham is a leading theorist and practitioner of art museum teaching. She's co-author of Teaching in the Art Museum, Interpretation and Experience. And Adjoa Jones Almeida is Deputy Director of Learning and Social Impact at the Brooklyn Museum. Reflecting on her experiences, she actually contributed to the award-winning anthology, Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Non-Profit Industrial Complex. And if I can just, by way of an introduction, talk a little bit about Hauser Wirth again. For Hauser Wirth, our programs all seek to inspire creativity and passion, as we heard from Manuela. And we're concerned with this because at the heart of what we do are our artists, as we heard from Angel. And we want to ensure that high-quality art can be shared with as wide an audience as possible. And across our departments, we really work hard to ensure that all of us play our part in that. Every member of the team contributes to that quality and the importance of the work that we do. We want everyone to have access then to the outcome. You know, we want as many people to appreciate what they see. We don't need them to know about all the people who worked on it, but we want them to have a valuable, quality experience. And that experience is so important, that learning from looking at the art in the gallery, the piece of work on the wall in the exhibition. That time can be life-changing for a young artist. It can be formative for some. It can help people navigate complex situations in their life. We often turn to art at difficult times, and it can help us escape. But it can also teach us so many transferable skills, skills that help us articulate things that are difficult to describe. Because let's be honest, talking about art is actually quite a challenging thing, and we do it in so many different ways. It can also help us understand emotional well-being and foster sound empathetic skills so we can communicate with others. It's a powerful tool. We need those skills. We need those creative, problem-solving, empathetic, and rational sort of reasoning tools more than ever to navigate the complex world that we find ourselves in today. And for me and for all of my colleagues who I work with, one of the greatest privileges is to walk through the gallery, to look at the work in that space, to spend time with it, as long as I like. What a privilege to look at that work. Aren't we lucky that we can do that? Aren't we lucky that we all have that experience and we can go into a gallery and do that? When I, and I'm sure one of my colleagues, have that opportunity to have that unlimited time looking at that work, I feel myself, I'm very aware of my own position and who I am and what I'm looking at. And I'm also very aware of time, of the presence of that work and the presence of myself and who I am looking at it at that moment of time. And that encounter, therefore, every single time I encounter an artwork, that encounter is going to be different because there are so many things at play. So, Rika and Adjoa, I'm going to kick off with a few questions, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues here to talk a little bit and with themselves and then with you and to engage in some questions. We'd love you to take part. Why does that matter so much, that moment?
I would just prelude that in the last conversation with Angel and José, when you asked the question, do you remember a moment when you looked at a work of art, our whole row back there shuddered, and someone said, here it comes. Because we've seen so many moments where it doesn't happen, and so many moments where the conditions aren't quite right. And I think that probably everyone who is gathered here today, and certainly Adjoa and I, share this deep commitment to that moment. What happens when you stand before a work of art? What makes you decide to stay, or what makes you decide to go? Are there questions that get in the way that keep you from going closer or keep you from going in? And those questions can be anything from, is it real? To, I'm not adequate to the task? To, I've seen it before, I don't need to look at it again. So something magical has to happen in that critical moment where you feel the artwork comes alive and that you come alive in the artwork. And if that happens, then the possibility of dialogue opens up and participation opens up. And participation is not just us, the visitors, but it's the artwork amidst the visitors. We are all speaking, the artwork and the people.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that to say that for me, and this might be a little controversial to say, it's not necessarily even about the artwork, but it's about the looking, the looking collectively, and what really at anything. I mean, I think anything can be treated as an artwork if we decide collectively that to focus our energy in observation in a particular direction. And I think for me, I do not actually come from an art historical background at all. Did not grow up going to museums at all. And I think that, but I from very young in very different contexts, have always been aware of the power of this thing that we refer to as art, and what that opens up for people individually and collectively. And it is through my experience in the Brooklyn Museum has been also my learning ground for museums, and for art, quote unquote art, contemporary art, other kinds of objects, art objects, and historic objects. And I have come into kind of wonder and awe and curiosity as I discovered this field of object-based teaching, because there is a tool, there is a technology there, there's something there that I think is really potent and really powerful, and that I think can really be transformative if we nurture it in that direction.
Okay, so that nurturing now, we're talking less about the individual looking, but forming a dialogue and sharing that experience with other people. So can you talk us a little bit about how you do that in those spaces?
You want to kick it off or something?
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll say that I think that there's one of the, as I've kind of come into this field and grown in this field, I've learned some approaches that have been incredibly useful and that I still find to be incredibly useful.
One being, we might get the secrets.
Yeah. This is not. I feel like a lot of folks here probably are pretty familiar with this. So I don't know how much of a secret it is, but I think what people refer to as visual thinking strategies, VTS, is a very pragmatic, great tool to kind of set the stage of like open-ended interaction. But I feel like there's more to it, And for me, some of the other strands of legacy and learning that have been powerful and interesting for me include people like I'm both African American and Brazilian. I have a complicated relationship with Paulo Freire. Is one of my kind of iconic thinking mentors, and that idea of trusting a process without a preconceived agenda sounds great. It's actually really tricky to do, but that kind of trust and faith in process is, I think, another critical ingredient to activate the potential of what can happen in a gallery-based or art-based dialogue. Another big source of inspiration for me is the thinker Audre Lorde, and her insistence on holding complexity and an intersectional approach for experience, so that when you're in a space with people, you monitor your automatic impulse to think who people are, what they bring, what they think, and the kind of self-monitoring about that, and truly perceiving and being with people in the same way that you are with that object, of like allowing the thing to really be what it are all things that I think about in a gallery experience. Also energy. As a diasporic person, we have long traditions in energy manipulation. And I think that there's something about educators in a space, and it's one of the things that I find so inspiring in Rika's work, is part of why we teach some of her writings in our 35-year-old fellowship program to this day, but like actually recognizing and talking and reflecting on how energy manifests itself in the moment. And it's unique in every single moment, but how do you recognize that and teach people to think about that and train educators to also recognize that? Those are all, I think, some of the ingredients that are really critical.
And I would just add to that, perhaps Maxine Green's words, the great Maxine Green, who always believed in possibility, that it wasn't predetermined, it wasn't constricted, it wasn't going somewhere, it was opening up the imagination, it was opening up the possible, and that's where the artwork lived most profoundly within the human being.
And what about the setting and how that setting shapes? I mean, back to OreOluwa, that idea about where we are and what the environment that we're in is like when we have that encounter. Do you want to say a few things about that?
Well, the setting, and both Adjoa and I come from these great art museums. Adjoa from the Brooklyn Museum, and I spent decades at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and then the Frick Collection. And the magnificence of those spaces with the presentations of the works of art are both welcoming and forbidding, and how we come to stand before something and have its meaning and its importance and its necessity open to us is, I think the question. But I think it was more complicated. If I can go way back in my own past, that when I was a very young museum educator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the Greek and Roman curators took me aside and she said, and I was probably all of 25 years old, and she pokes me in the shoulder and she says, "Your job is to memorize what the curators say and then interpret it in language the public can understand and tell them what we mean." And from that moment on, the path seemed really clear that that was not the path. And so I began listening instead of talking, and I found that what people had to say was extraordinary and way beyond the, shall I say, the curatorial capacities for research and study. And that where people were taking the works of art was into their own lives and then sharing their lives through those works of art with us. And that was where the action was. And it was in both, honor for these great works of art that marched along the walls of the galleries, but it was taking them into our own possession, which is what really mattered.
I love that phrase, "that's where the action was." Because there is a sense, I think, like for educators that feel themselves as like that is your calling and that is your artistry, so to speak, that you're seeking that high, right? There's a certain sense of high that happens when the energy's aligned and something starts to pop off in a conversation that you could not have predicted, intended, made it happen. All you can do is kind of try to set the elements to allow the thing to manifest. But I think that once you experience it, you want the action. You seek that out, those kind of moments, right?
Yeah, well said.
And those moments, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I'm with Rika, my early experiences were boring, to say the least, until I discovered that I was allowed to speak, I think there was a fear that you had to be silent in the museum space and you couldn't actually have dialogue, that you were there just to look and not to talk. And I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the experience then of that dialogue, then the capacity of that conversation to reveal these differences and that we're finding so inspiring, and often, for us as those facilitators, that we're learning constantly, that there is no fixed outcome, and often it reveals difference and knowledge that we then gain as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I think what becomes really critical is this idea of the educator as facilitator, right? And then also this recognition that what people see in a work, in an object, in a painting, is as much about them as it is about what is actually there, and that's actually an amazing thing. That's not a bad thing. But then also, I think that, another tricky, powerful aspect of this is how do we build this muscle to truly create spaces that allow for dialogue across difference? What does that actually mean in the moment? And what is it about building a conversation around an external object that is not you, it's not me, it's this thing here that we're looking at together, that allows people to be more open to differences, because they're not differences in that moment about the thing that I believe versus the thing that you believe. It's about differences in what we're interpreting together, the meaning that we're collectively trying to make of this thing together. And that feels like a muscle that is really important in this moment for us as people, as like humans. But also that in and of itself is not going to bring the kind of change in the world that we need. So I think one question that I also later on would love to hear from other people is like, do we agree that that's a muscle that needs to be built? Why? And then what comes after that? What comes beyond that? What is the thing that then helps us to activate that muscle in ways that might truly hold the potential to be transformative beyond that little moment in the gallery, in the museum, or wherever?
And I would just add to that the time-honored dilemma of, can the work of art stand by itself, or does it require a complicated context in order to understand it? Is it something that we can make sense of through ourselves because it's somehow essential to our lives? Or does it require knowing who the artist is and what the artist was thinking and the times in which the artist lived? And how is that altered by the times in which we are living? And I think probably the literary theorists have probed this much more deeply through the idea of close reading versus historical reading. And we're definitely in a time of historical reading now that's been, I think, propelled by current events and very necessary rifts in our society that we need to somehow constantly work to address and to heal. Whether or not the museum space is a safe space for those conversations, I'm no longer sure. And it's something that I wish to turn to the audience in time as well.
Well, in the essence of time, I understand that you've chosen some images that I think, Rika, you're going to start and share your selected images and explain to us their appropriateness to this conversation. I have a little thing here with a big green dot for you.
Can I let you click it?
Yeah.
Okay. Old-fashioned knife. So we thought we would share some briefly. I would share one artwork and Adjoa would show another that we have had recent dialogues with in our museums as a way to bring the gallery or the museum gallery into this space. And I have to take a moment to pause. I need to recognize some long-time colleagues and friends who have helped me arrive at this place of magical dialogue. And three of them are here: Brian Hogarth, Bank Street, and Cyril Levinson, and Chris Scorza. We've been talking about these issues for several decades, and I'm in much gratitude to the three of you. And if Radia Harper is with us remotely, the same.
Radia!
The same. So above is a work of art that's long been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I shared it just a couple of weeks ago, and I note that it was after October 7th. that this dialogue took place. And in the spirit of openness, I asked for observations and kind of the ways that it had opened many times before opened again, the diagonal division of the work of art into the cultivated side on the right and the untrammeled wilderness on the left, the sort of impending storm or storm that was moving out. The curvilinear distinctive geological form of something that's called the Oxbow, which is an old river that's tying itself off. And then if we go to the next slide, right, the tiny details that would start to emerge of tiny bits of people in boats or wisps of smoke that were coming up, but a curious artist's umbrella that bridges the two sides of these two worlds. And to look more closely at the wilderness side, the cracked tree that indicated some violence and some destruction from a storm, most likely, but a wilderness that was so thick and so dense it was almost impenetrable. And then to go back to the whole and to see this almost as a kind of a dialectic between the cultivated and the wild, and a question that was relevant in the 1830s when it was painted, but is still intensely relevant to us today as we face issues of climate change and danger. And upon close looking, you see that the artist has put himself into the picture. That's Thomas Cole. And he's at work on a canvas, which was actually a falsification because the canvas was actually painted in the studio, but he puts himself here observing the natural world, and he turns and he looks out at the viewer. So after some time has gone by, inevitably, right, we come in a little closer, and you may start to see something strange that you can't quite account for, given it's the 1830s, and it's far back on the hill, just under the sky. The storm is coming in from the left or leaving to the left, and if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see something that from a distance looks remarkably like ski trails or logging trails. But if you speak or read Hebrew, you will recognize immediately that this reads as Noah. And we have now left the territory of curatorial certainty. If you look this up on the museum's website, the Metropolitan Museum's website, this is not there. It's not included in the account of the artwork. But anyone who reads Hebrew immediately recognizes this as Noah. So suddenly the dialectic between the cultivated and the wilderness and the storm becomes very powerful. What gets even more provocative, if we go to the next slide, if you turn the painting upside down, or if you stand on your head in the museum's gallery, again, I, alas, do not speak Hebrew, but if anybody does, you will see that this is the partial formation of Shaddai, which means Almighty. So now I can go back. And so to pull back out, what happened at the very end of this dialogue was something that had never happened before, which was, in the context of all that was happening in the Middle East, the dialogue, the group, suddenly came to the idea that in the context of the book of Genesis, and there were Hebrew scholars just remarkably in the group that day, said in the context of Genesis that God had created the world, God had destroyed the world, Noah was sent as redeemer. God promises never to destroy the world again, but the artist looks out at us as if to decide that for ourselves now. So with that, I will turn it over to Adjoa.
Wow, that's hard. That's hard to gotta sit with that for a minute. I mean, so can I just like reflect on that for a minute before? I think one of the things that is like so powerful about that is also.
Go back. Sorry.
Oh yeah, how? Whoops.
Red one,
Go forward.
underneath.
Go forward to your piece.
Red one underneath.
Oh, red one, right? Okay, sorry. How it really matters who is looking at this thing together, right? And the interplay between the individual interaction and the collective interaction, and also the collective narrative that then is created. So this idea of like the meaning that is made through this collective kind of brain interaction. Yeah.
And can I just say that, again, in the early days of getting people to talk in museums, we thought it was more fun and it was a nice thing and people enjoyed it more. But it's deeper than that. It's potentially transformative to the individual in believing in the possibility of understanding not only the art but ourselves more deeply. But we are also contributing to the artwork. And that story should push the curators and the art historians at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to include these many voices and these many understandings that are made possible through lived experience, but also, as Adjoa just said, through their own scholarship that they bring.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So I guess with that, I'll offer a piece for us to look at together for a second, and also we'll share an experience that I had looking at this work collectively with others. Let me see. I'm going to keep going till I find it. This is a work by Bob Thompson from 1963. And this is a work, some of you may already know the title of it, but I'll keep that. If you don't, I'll just hold off on sharing that for a second, because in the experience that we've developed with this painting at the Brooklyn Museum, one of the strategies has been to hold off on details of title or even biography of the artist until later in the dialogue. And this is actually a work that inaugurated a program called Project Reset at the Brooklyn Museum. We're now entering our 4th year, and it's a collaboration with the Center for what's now called Center for Justice Innovation, the Brooklyn DA's office, and actually 2 artists, Derek Forger and Sean Leonardo, were kind of instrumental thought partners in helping us to think about how to develop this art-based alternative to incarceration for individuals receiving misdemeanors. So if you were to receive a desk appearance ticket for jumping the turnstile or shoplifting, or at the time smoking weed or something of that nature, it happens to a lot of people, across all ages, across all income levels, but we know that disproportionately only some are over incarcerated and likely to receive a desk appearance ticket. So this is an alternative to incarceration program that actually was the first version of it was done in the new museum. And at the Brooklyn Museum, Derek Forger, Sean Leonardo, and Aaron Champions Powers and some of our educators began a conversation about what would it mean to have a collaboration across these very different stakeholders to bring that opportunity to Brooklyn. And what was unique about the Brooklyn version of this program is that the experience, it was not just for young people. The first version of it focused primarily to young people. At the Brooklyn, museum, it also extended for anyone 25 plus. So we had plenty of grandmas and, like all kinds of folks across ages coming through the program. And then also the other distinguishing factor was that there were two moments, one in the gallery that started with looking, open-ended looking, moved into some kind of VTS kind of approach. What's going on in this image? What do you see that makes you say that? What else can we find? And building, layering different interpretations. And then after about an hour of that, the group then moved into the art studio. And that was the new thing that was really unique to the Brooklyn version of this program, that then asked those participants to actually create art making based on some of the themes and ideas that were explored in the gallery. And then at the completion of the 2-hour program, the Brooklyn DA's office declines to prosecute, and the person doesn't have to deal with going to court, and it's not on their record, and that's that. And what's amazing about this work in the context of that experience is the way that, first of all, Craig Blue who is an amazing arts educator who facilitated these experiences for older audiences, for the older group. I had a chance to engage in several conversations with him facilitating. And it was just really interesting to notice what resonated in this image. So for example, this question of the kind of pale pink figures in the back, are they blocking? Are they welcoming? The people, often picking up on biblical references here, but also the dynamic between the three kind of reddish figures on the right versus the kind of purplish figure, reddish figure on the left. And the way in which often the interpretation, I remember, for example, one older woman saying that this was a mother with her son, and that the figures on the right were trying to take the son away from her, and just all kind, and again, not about your arrest experience, not about why you're here. It's about what do we see, what do we find in this work, and then once the educator, after some time of that, introduces some elements about this artist, that he was creating this painting at the height of the civil rights movement in this country. And now what else can we find? Then the layering of how the conversation then shifts to exploring, well, is this about earthly justice or heavenly justice? Who actually determines earthly justice? Is it the laws? What was actually happening in that moment of the civil rights movement in this country, and how might that be reflected in what we're seeing, what we're finding in this image? And all of that, not at all talking about why people are there or what has brought them to the museum. People are very confused, by the way, about why they were being asked to come to the museum for this program, which is part of the power of the program, I think. And then back in the studio, they're reflecting and creating and reshifting their own images based on their experience. And at the very end of the whole experience, subtly bring it back to, so how does all of this that we're sharing, how do you think this reflects back to your arrest experience today that brought you here, And the power of being very intentional and not being overly didactic, and not acting like you want it to go a certain way, or there's some message that you need to tell people about what they should think, how they should feel about this moment or the criminal justice system or whatever, is, I think, has been, in my experience, kind of following this program, so powerful. And just the transformation from like when someone first walks in the room and is like, why am I here? And is dreading having to even be there, to then being able to go to an experience where they are, a human being in a room with other human beings reflecting on this object and able to have an analysis and a collective reflection that is so honest and way beyond what they would have experienced had they, had to go to court in front of a judge. So I'll pause there. We actually, how are we doing with time?
We have 12 minutes left, and we want to now I'm kind of exhausted having gone through. That was quite phenomenal and exhausting. And I think we're just going to give everyone a moment of pause to kind of take some of those things in, actually. But then, yes, Adjoa, we're going to engage our audience, I believe.
Because we actually have some questions for you all.
We wanted to reverse the the tradition of audience asking questions, but we look to learn from you. And I would just salute, again, the name of the learning exchange, that we share what we know, but we learn what we don't know in a dialogue like this. So do you want to start, Adjoa?
I guess I'll start with a question for you all, and I hope folks will, be open to sharing. For those of you that have just sat through the first session that was so focused on a really interesting exchange between two individual artists and kind of bringing some transparency to that process. What do you make of what stands out to you between some of the kind of gems or threads in that conversation versus this conversation, which is totally not from an artist's perspective, but it's about focusing on what an artwork can do and instigate? I'm just curious, what strikes you between the similarities and differences between those two moments?
Can you just wait for Marissa to bring you the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Calder Zwicky. I'm the executive director of Artistic Noise. We work with court-involved young people across New York City. We also do the art-making component of Midtown Community Court's Project Reset, so it was great to hear you. I just wanted to say, as two museum professionals and educators, I was very struck by and appreciate your focus on the environment and the space. I think experiences in front of art are very important, and artwork is very important. We've taken our young people to Brooklyn Museum, the Met. We've had very good experiences, and we've also had very bad experiences. And I would say 9 times out of 10, the quality of that experience was not directly related to the artwork we'd seen. It was related to the environment we experienced. And I guess my question back to you both or to the group would be, how can we as people who don't always have complete control over all of those aspects, I'm not in control of security, I'm not in control of curatorial, I'm not in control of operations, what can we do to create, and I think you touched upon this, but to create as welcoming and as warm and as dialogue-filled environment as possible, rather than something that's didactic and overpoliced?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it gets into the crux of the matter around where are museums at in this moment more broadly. And as I know, everybody in this room is very steeped and has experienced in the flesh the kind of the internal contradictions of those spaces. And I'll just say that within the context of the Brooklyn Museum, those are not new contradictions, right? So some of you may know that in the 1970s, there were massive protests in the Brooklyn Museum, actual sit-ins by Central Brooklyn Black artists demanding space, demanding visibility. That was actually the genesis of the community galleries, and then you fast forward whatever it is, 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, the narrative is like, you know, isn't it amazing that Brooklyn Museum had a community gallery? And what often sometimes is erased is how it actually got there. Like what had to happen for that to happen. And I think, you know, in the 10 years that I've been at the museum, I've seen that over and over again. Like the real, for better, for worse, you know, people have, I think because of the tradition of First Saturdays, have a very different relationship to the museum and sense of ownership, which is great. But also with that comes what they might ignore and just sigh when they experience at the Met. When they experience that same kind of dynamic at the Brooklyn Museum, we're going to hear about it, and we do hear about it. And there's a lot of, resentment, and people are very vocal. And that, in turn, pushes many folks within the institution to constantly have those really challenging conversations. And sometimes it feels like we're able to break through and some real transformative change comes of it. Sometimes that's long lasting, sometimes it's not. And sometimes we're not. And sometimes it feels like we're kind of hitting our head against the wall and somehow not moving forward on certain things. I'm also curious on that front. Like, I honestly have not been in gallery spaces that much, only in more recent years, and it hasn't been part of my trajectory for most of my life until more recently, as I've kind of moved into this kind of art world scene. And I'm curious and interested in how also gallery spaces seem to be shifting. And like, what do we make of this kind of blur? Also, as I've moved up and come into realms of more leadership in the museum, seeing a little bit about, understanding a little bit more about the funding of those institutions. And so this idea of public-facing institutions as public, as actually public, versus gallery spaces as private, those are not quite true binaries, right? There's a lot of actual, there's a lot of ways that there's some similarities that are not always acknowledged. So I'm curious about also how you all feel and perceive those spaces. How have you felt the difference in terms of conversations in spaces like this one, versus Brooklyn Museums of the world, versus more smaller, community-based cultural institutions? Like, have you experienced those settings actually significantly influencing the dynamics of a conversation?
I just can speak to this gallery in particular. I'm Robin Abbott. I'm the program director of Culture for One. And we provide access to the arts for young people and children in foster care and in transition. And we have started a partnership with this gallery at the request of the gallery and Mark Bradford. And we just did a beautiful afternoon with the artist Ange. And we bring young people in who do not go into museum spaces and do not go into gallery spaces. And it's very clear that the reason they don't do that is it's almost not so much what's happening inside, but the facade. And the idea, like you were talking about, what happened, in the last conversation, the idea of possibility and the idea of lack of expectation, is that they feel that these places are not for them somehow, that they are not built and set up for them. They don't know who it's for, but it's not for them. And by being invited to step over the threshold and to have the experience in Hauser Wirth that they did, where it was welcoming, where there was dialogue, where what they had to say was really the most important thing, how they experienced the artwork. They gave tours of the Mark Bradford exhibit from their own experience. And his exhibit was about displacement, and his experience was, it spoke to them. And all I can say personally is that, we had a young person, it was her birthday. And she took the subway in from way out in Queens where she lived so that she could come and poke her head in the gallery to say, it's my birthday. And when we spoke with Ange just the other day, there was a young person we had never met with before. She wasn't an artist. She was in school for social work. But she looked at me and she was looking around and she said, I wish I had had this when I was young and when I was going through trauma. Because it's a portal, to express your imagination and to sort of reinvent what your world can be. So I will say in terms of a gallery space, you can create, as Hauser and Wirth has for the young people that we serve, you can create a life-changing experience by just finding a way to get them over the threshold into the space and looking at the art.
I'm going to piggyback off that and expand it. I'm Dan Huff. I'm with the Joan Mitchell Foundation, but prior I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem, so perspective. From what you were just sharing, I want to throw out some keywords that I think will then connect to what I want to share. Visibility, anonymity, invisibility, and ownership. As someone who identifies as an artist, who was an art history major in undergrad at a prestigious undergrad program, I moved to New York and didn't feel welcome in galleries. With the knowledge, with the vocabulary, with the language. But going to museums felt like home, felt safe. And I'm interested in thinking about what was that distinction. It could be because I graduated in 2005 and galleries have been doing the work since even 2005 to change that. But that notion of ownership feels really important. And the anonymity, which can feel safe in museums, but in galleries, there's such a visibility, or that's what I felt in going in, like I needed to dress a certain way. Could I walk in if I couldn't buy anything? If we think about the commercialization of the gallery space, and actually having someone who worked at a museum bring me into a gallery. Because you can totally come in here. You don't need to be able to buy anything. They don't care. But there's something about not being acknowledged when walking in actually made me feel not welcome, where it's like, would you acknowledge someone if you thought they could pay? And so sitting with, yes, I'm just sitting with anonymity as a space of safety, and the challenges of going into a museum as a certain type of person, but being hyper visible. But yet in a gallery space, the anonymity, I don't know. I'm just sitting with that, where even as someone who should feel welcome in all these spaces and feel like they were mine, I didn't. And what is that piece? And I think those are still things that we are working through.
I thank you for both those comments. I think there's a lot there for us to unpack. On that last comment, it reminds me of a conversation that we were kind of having previous to this, which I feel like, is there something, whether or not, we know the kind of the real messiness of private-public funding of all of our public institutions, right? Because we have no truly publicly funded institutions anymore. Even public school realm, it's deteriorating. But if you put that aside for a minute, still the idea of a public institution, and I think there's something there around what you're raising around this idea of anonymity, and at least in theory, even there's a whole bunch of other problems, right? In terms of an institution like the Brooklyn Museum or the Met or whatever. But the idea that it's quote unquote for the public versus a commercial gallery space, what are the said and unsaid dynamics that show up that can impact who even walks through the door? I think both of you kind of pointing to that. And I'm not trying to romanticize the idea of the public, because I think that's super tricky also. But I do think that both of your points kind of tug at something there for us to think about. How many common, the idea of the commons, where does that exist now? And Where are those spaces and who is included in those? Who sets the parameters for those spaces?
And I think we should just add a tag maybe to Calder's question. I mean, insurmountable condition problems in galleries of crowding and noise and the forbidding ways to get to wayfind within museums. They can be almost overwhelming and may preempt any kind of deeper experience. And just a tag to the admission prices of museums. I mean, if you don't have a pay what you wish option, it's very, very steep to go in, whereas the galleries, once you know, are free, at least to walk in. But yeah, I know we have to come to a close, but I thought maybe I would just end by the belief in what we do, of connecting people with art and in ways that we continuously hope are meaningful and profound and occasionally transformative. And in the words of Marcel Duchamp, that what we all believe is that the viewer completes the artwork.
Rika, Adjoa, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I'm delighted to introduce Jane South, Chair of Fine Arts at Pratt Institute, and co-director with artist Mickalene Thomas of Pratt Forward. Jane and I connected a few months ago, I think on LinkedIn actually, and then we met and we chatted about the art ecosystem and some of our concerns for how the young artists navigate the world that they find themselves in today. And that's when I learned about Pratt Forward. So I'm just going to hand over to Jane, Mickalene and Mary, and they're going to tell you all about it. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Debbie. This is very exciting because I think one of our real goals with Pratt Forward is to spread the word, not least to artists who may be interested, but also to people like you who are also doing very important things out there in the art ecosystem that maybe we can connect with, because I think at the root of Pratt Forward is this idea of a kind of rhizomic connectivity that is based on generosity and reciprocity. So with that said, what is Pratt Forward? It is a 1-month program. It is fully funded. 10 artists are selected from an open call. 5 are Pratt alumni, but any other artist who is US, essentially has a US work visa, can apply. It is kind of a movable feast. The philosophy in terms of how the program works structurally is like the philosophy of the artist studio. You know, you do what you can with what you have. You don't wait for the right conditions or for the right amount of money or for anybody else to do anything. You do it. You do something and you follow it down. And in that way, you can actually generate something that you couldn't have generated if you sat down and tried to preconceive it from the get-go. So it's a process of collaboration. And the initial collaboration really began because I arrived at Pratt as Chair of Fine Arts in 2017, and I said, let's look at who our alumni are. And we have many, many, many exceptional alumni, but I have to say, when I realized that Mickalene Thomas was one of our graduates, BFA 2000, I thought, I need to meet Mickalene. So I randomly reached out, and generously, Mickalene said, let's have breakfast. And then what happened?
Great setup. Nice segue, Jane. Welcome, everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you for this opportunity for us to share Pratt Forward with you all. Well, it was a meeting that Jane and I had in the neighborhood of Fort Greene, where Pratt is. I had, prior to my meeting with Jane, I was teaching at Pratt. I taught a couple classes there, and she was wondering why I was no longer at Pratt. And we talked about that. I won't get into those details, but it was mainly because it was feeling a little despondent in how some of the education and development for professional artists was going, and wanted to really figure out for myself as a working artist some of the tools and strategies that I could implement and provide for emerging and underrepresented artists as they move forward in their careers, because I felt as though the institutions was not doing the service to us and justice to us as we became postgraduates, and providing us the access and resources that's needed for properly running your studios. So I expressed this to Jane. I expressed these ideas of providing some type of tools and strategies and ways in which we can create context and where artists would feel ownable in their own practice when they leave the school, that they had the understanding that not only was it a studio practice, but also a small business. And I know that's something that feels uncomfortable with people and most artists when they hear the word business or small business. But the reality is, it's a small business, right? But that's not provided to us. There's no understanding of that. And I just expressed to her some anecdotes in my own stories as a working artist, how the struggle and the need to have that support, to have mentorship, to have a sense of direction and know-how, to have the 101 tools to have in place. So as I grow as an artist, that I was making the best decisions for myself in my own career. And so I think that's the magic and the development of Pratt Forward, really providing a space, a safe space, really, for artists to be transparent, to ask questions with art world leaders that we invite to the space. And those art world leaders can consist of many different individuals, curators, people who are curators within the museum space or gallery space, copyright lawyers, accountants, bookkeepers, art advisors, and just to really give context to the art world at large and what that means for us individually as we navigate that space. Because it looks and it does and it feels differently to each and every one of us. My trajectory as an artist is completely different than Angel's, Angel, Otero, and any other artists in this room. It's going to look different based on your hierarchy of needs, right? And so what does that mean for you as an artist? And what decisions do you make because of that?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that we arrived at this being an alumni program is this question of scale. And this question of scale, I think, affects all of us in many different ways. But for example, at Pratt, our MFA program, we have 40, that's 40, students in each of the 2 years of the program. We do have professional practices. We have many kind of arenas in which students talk about context, etc., who their audience is, what kind of life they would like to have as an artist. But what we're talking about at Pratt Forward is we're really getting to what actually is going on
pulling
in this
the curtain
ecosystem.
back.
And that means people going to sensitive places where you want to be in a small room with people, so you can be totally transparent. And as was mentioned this morning, transparency is a big problem in this art ecosystem. So one of the things I think that as an educator within my own institution, I'm always asking maybe the awkward question to find out how this is funded, who's at the table, etc. And what we know, and I think what Mickalene and many artists of your generation have actively been doing, is reaching out to artists who are coming up to reveal very specific things that you have had to negotiate and sometimes messes you've got into because you didn't know, to do our best to share. And that does mean case-by-case detail and specifics. And Mary, who we'd love to hear from in a minute, but I'm just going to set this up, So, you know, we talk about young artists. It's not always young artists. Yeah. You know, there are artists, and we see this in applications for Pratt Forward, who have been making art for 10, 20 years. They still have no idea or clue as to how do I get my work in front of that person? You know, is it going to be off-putting if I cold call? You know, how do I get access? Because truth is, a lot of us in this room have paid positions, we have healthcare, we have 401ks, and we're working in the arts ecosystem, and a lot of artists don't. So we need to shift the paradigm, and we need to see more artists being able to make a living, even if they are not studio artists who have a marketplace. There are important work being done by people who are, you know, engaging with communities. You mentioned Sean Leonardo. Sean Leonardo is a social practice artist. Yes. This project, Recess, Google it, it's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. So how can we also help those artists to get paid? So the reason I'm going over to Mary is because Mary doesn't have the traditional pathway to becoming an artist. So I will allow Mary to tell us why, how you found out about Pratt Forward and how maybe Pratt Forward has helped you or what it could do better.
Absolutely. And other programs as well.
And other programs, yes.
Thank you. So yeah, like Jane said, I didn't come into the art world through a traditional trajectory. I was working a fellowship at MoMA PS1 as a project manager for learning when a colleague of mine had told me they received an email encouraging them to apply for Pratt Forward. And then, you know, once somebody says something, you just see it everywhere. And I did a little bit more research, and I was kind of contemplating, you know, I'm working, you know, at the museum full time. Can I actually do this residency? And I, you know, went back and forth, talked to my supervisor, and got the okay. And I talked with my colleague and asked them if they were okay with me applying too. And they said, yeah, sure. I applied. I won the fellowship, the residency, and it was just life-changing. Being around a community of artists from all types of disciplines, with all levels of experience, having Jane and Mickalene be mentors, but then also having the art world professionals come in, folks to help us, like the Artists' Rights Society, how to protect our intellectual property. We also had people come in and, you know, talk to us about how to scale up our practice and running a studio. And it also came at a time when I was being offered a show at the Brooklyn Museum. So it came at a critical moment in my career, and having these two to lean on, as well as the other folks in the community, was just invaluable for me.
Just listening to Mary talk about the different programs we offer, or the workshops we offer at Pratt Forward. We were fortunate for second iteration. So Pratt Forward's we're working towards our third iteration. This is our third year. We started in 2020 online during COVID, during the pandemic. Initially, we always wanted to be in-person residency. And so, as you know, for many of us, our lives were shifted. And we thought we would have to put this on hold. And it was at a time where everyone was figuring out. And I had just experienced, I think I was doing a project at Yale, and I couldn't go because I was international, doing an international project. And so I offered at Yale to do the course online. And it went so well. So I called Jane right away, and I said, we can do this online.
By which time we'd been teaching woodworking online using potatoes and carrots. So I thought, exactly. Yes, I'm sure we can do this online.
Right? And so we were like, let's do this. And so it was, to our surprise, how incredible the response was, that the need, and I bring this up only because the need of the professional artists at that time was incredible, that they still wanted to have this engagement with us. And then all of the professional art world leaders that came in on board. We had Christofalou, we had Sarah Workman, we have all of these people who came through and showed up and were so present with each and every one of the cohorts. And it became this magical, safe space for ideas and just exchange of just how to. And I think one of the ways in which a lot of the artists question is, building up their studio practice. And yes, there's different models, and many artists are working within those various models. But there is a great need for, if you're a working artist, of how you protect yourself, right? How do you protect yourself against, issues when you come into contact with gallery situations of contracts, right? Learning how to read a contract. For me, a lot of the discovery is trial and error, or just not having someone I can call and talk to about it. Creating an advisory program where artists feel like they have the access to others within the art world that they could sort of pick up the phone and ask questions. And so for me, this is the most important, is providing just a network community for artists, so that way when Mary enters this program, as she did, that now her network has sort of increased. She's part of a larger ecosystem that now she can lean in on all of these people that she's built relationships with for copyrights, like the Artist Rights Society. Like now she has them as access.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's about creating the conditions in which something can evolve, and creating a framework, and then plugging the relevant thing in as that thing emerges, right? It's the same, you do a syllabus for a class. You say to the class on the first day, this will change. Not may, but will, because it's about you and what you need. So similarly, we had a structure. We still have the structure that we'll use in March for Pratt Forward, but it's all about getting to know the cohort, and we connected the 2021 online cohort with the 2022 in-person cohort. And when it comes to physical location and those conditions, I mean, we sometimes hold our breath, because again, we haven't got, this year we're going to be here, this year we're going to be here. We know that right now we're online. We know that next time we want to be in person, but we have no idea where. We don't want it to be at Pratt, because I think the other aspect of this, and this is also, I think, it's encouraging to see a lot of academies really asking themselves the question of, how are we not just connected to the community that we are in, but how are we actively in conversation with that community? Again, not as, we have all the knowledge and all the everything, and, how can we, give that to you? But, how can we learn from you? Obviously, there are gentrification questions always about institutions, especially when they are perceived as elite institutions in neighborhoods that aren't, and tuition is such that it's not accessible to all. So what is our responsibility as an institution? I always ask the question, if a local library closes, a lot of the time the community gets up and rallies in support of the library, and we need the library, it does this, it does this, it does this. We should all ask ourselves, what if our institution closed? Who would be on the streets saying, we need this place? So what we do then is we go out there and we meet people. And New Lab stepped up. I did a presentation to the president of Pratt's task force, and somebody on that task force said, this would be great at New Lab, which is a tech incubator in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And what they said was, it would be really interesting for us, we have a lot of techie people, to have a bunch of artists here. Let's see what happens. So that was October 2022. Very grateful to Silver Art Projects, Gregory Thornbury, Executive Director up there, because this March we will be at the World Trade Center, and we will be aligning with Silver Art, and we will, again, reciprocity, be bringing some of our programming to the cohort of 28 at Silver Art, and then we will be partying up on the 28th floor because we don't have as much space where we're going to be. So I'm going to go back to you, Mary, because I know that for you, also, when you were with us at Pratt Forward, opportunities started to come your way, and a lot of the time we're always talking about how can you get opportunities as an artist, but sometimes the other thing happens. A lot of opportunities come to you. How do you select? And how do you protect your own creative development and give space for yourself to grow as an artist? So, Mary, maybe you can help us out with that?
Well, one of the opportunities that came to me was Mickalene. I guess it was alignment, right? At the time, she was working on a show looking at 19th, 18th century African-American photography, and my work just kind of fit in that vein. And now I'm in a group show that she's curated at Yale, A Portrait of an Unlikely Space. It's open through January 7th, so please make your way there if you can. The catalog debuts on the 28th.
It did on the 26th of October,
26th.
so yeah, we have to get
26th.
you yours. But
Yes.
it's beautiful catalog.
So that's just one way how my work has been supported by Pratt Forward. But in addition to that, through the mentorship around my Brooklyn Museum solo show, and the advice that I got from these two to go forward with that show and expand that show and really be in deep relationship with the curator, I was able to also be invited to the Netherlands. So I'll be in a group show that opens on the 21st through November 23rd next year in Brilliant Light. So please, if you happen to be over there, give it a visit. So yeah, I mean, for me, how do I decide? Really rest in my own internal self-practice, right, of care. Is this opportunity liberatory? Is this opportunity going to do a service not only for my work, but for the community that I'm trying to amplify through my practice? So yeah, that's pretty much how I come and I approach what I've learned through the residency.
Great. Mickalene, how's it going? What do you think? Is Pratt Forward doing what we want it to do?
You're too much. Yes, it is, but I think we have room to always, and we want to grow, and we want to expand, and we want. I think some of the ways in which I'm hoping that Pratt Forward would grow is also creating a network, a data network for artists. And I have these ideas of the community that we're building with our art world professionals and artists. And this network is that there's also this database system similar to like a NIFA.org, where artists anyone can go, and there will be like a list of lawyers, right, that are vetted. There will be a list of bookkeepers that are vetted. There will be a list of advisors that are vetted. There will be a list of different galleries and also the alumni that's on there, so you can look and see, and we are watching sort of their trajectory and highlighting their exhibitions. But this is the space where you can go to get and collect information, so you don't have to necessarily, figure it out on your own. But these are professionals that are vetted in the community that will protect and allow access to artists should they have questions. Because oftentimes, I'm still finding, even on my own level, that we don't communicate enough. And we're not sharing enough information to one another. And it often feels siloed and alone, and you feel like you have to figure it out by yourself. And we shouldn't feel that way. This is a community of diverse, brilliant, talented, and incredible people, right? And none of us should be feeling like I have to figure it out on my own, right? By tripping over their shoelaces or failure, right? Yes, that aspect is there, but we should also be provided the right tools for success, right? And how do we set that up? And so for me, the growth of Pratt Forward is thinking about ways in which that we can provide those fundamental tools for success for artists, right? So that they can make the right decisions for themselves. Or they can decide, yes, this works for me. No, it doesn't. These are the right. I can't tell you how many accountants I've gone through, just because they're not the right fit for me, right? Or they don't provide the right information, or they're not fully vetted, right? And how often do we, in the art world, let people into our art world who shouldn't be?
How do you navigate a studio visit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people just, it's one of those things.
The basics of navigating studio visits.
Somebody comes to my studio. Well, then what? Well, they look at the work. Well, maybe you want to think before that person comes to the studio, when they've left your studio, how do you want to feel for a start? Because it's a very vulnerable thing, having somebody in your studio. How do you want to make sure that you are also asking questions? Again, reciprocity. I think we're so used to this, the kind of the sense that the artist is very excited to show their work. Of course they are. Very excited that somebody's interested to come to their studio. Of course they are. But also, it is a gift to that person to come to your studio. Your work being out there in the world is important and necessary. And I don't know how many, I know a lot of you here are artists, but I also know that some people that I talk to who aren't artists, that's never occurred to them, right? Because being an artist and being in that, let's face it, it's a power relationship, can feel very, very compromising and kind of icky, to be honest. So the first job is to say to the artist, remember what it is you do. And remember that what you do matters, and think about the fact that you have chosen to prioritize in your life something that nobody might actually come along and say they care about. But still it matters. So I think it's, and that's just not a one-off,
But also having
right?
them really
you have to
think
reaffirm
about
that.
what the foundation and their needs mean to them. And what that looks like. I think in our last workshop we really talked about that, right? We talked about what the hierarchy of needs may be for each person. And some, it may be family at the base, right? Others, it may be education,
Not everybody necessarily wants
exactly.
to...
But I'm saying it would vary to each of us, right? And being very honest with yourself. And these are the kind of things we work through and talk to them about, like really being intrinsically honest about who you are. I remember one of my first experiences deciding on or choosing a gallery to work with. And the artist that I respected at the time, and he's a mentor and was a teacher of mine at Yale, was Mel Bachner, said, you will know about the gallery you want to work with when you are ready, your work is ready, and you're emotionally centered. And that's when you know. And so that's kind of when you start thinking about what it means to you. And so it took me a while to show with a gallery because I didn't feel like those things were aligned and I didn't feel like I was ready. So I didn't have my first show like years after graduating until 2009. And people thought I was showing them. It was like I didn't, because I didn't feel like none of those things were ready. And so these are some of the things we talk about within Pratt Forward of like being responsible and being aware of who you are as not only an artist, but as an individual in this world and what it is you desire and what you want. And that is a way of navigating within the market, within whatever world it may be,
exactly.
whatever sort of direction. That's your compass. Like being truthful to your inner compass as a guide to help you lead your way through this complexities that we all deal with.
Which, funnily enough, everything you just said, I can remember, conversations that we have in the studio about the work. It's the same terms, right? To make work that is true. to you. It's your voice. You battle with those materials and processes to arrive at, to excavate the thing that is the work. It's not some idea that you then execute. So there are all of these parallels between what you do as an artist in the studio that are transferable to how do you then think about your life as an artist, which I think, again, a lot of the time, we don't kind of directly make a relationship between those two things.
There are many, what I think is really unique about Pratt Forward, and, you know, when you think about all of the other residencies, is that we are really providing a service to artists so that way they can feel a sense of accountability and ownership and awareness of how to sort of manage sort of their life and sort of have a community that sort of evolves as they grow within the within being an artist, and that they know that they have people to lean in on. Because oftentimes, many of them, even though they have these peer dialogues, they still feel alienated. They still feel a little confused or lost of how to even deal with curators, or, you know, and sort of like, as, you know, or working with the gallery, or putting up an exhibition, or just all of these things that we don't necessarily talk about because it's assumed, right? It's assumed that these things operate in a certain way. It's assumed that we're supposed to give 50%. It's assumed that we're supposed to just donate our work. It's all of these assumptions, but no one's having the real conversations and ways that those are actually decisions, right? They're not obligations. You know, they're
question everything, right? That's what you need to do as an artist in relation to your work, and that's what you need to do as an artist in relation to your life. And ask the awkward question, but obviously it's the manner in which you ask it that counts. I'm looking at the clock, so it would be great to have a conversation with you all. Before I do that, though, I do want to acknowledge once again Silver Art Projects, because thanks to that partnership, we will have a Pratt Forward 2024. Also, obviously you, Mickey. I mean, without you, this would not be happening. So thank you so much for your generosity, for everything that you do in the world in addition to Pratt Forward. It's incredible.
Oh, thank you.
It's generous.
Thank you. This is for me like a legacy project. It's something that, for me, I really get great sense of joy when I know that I'm really supporting other artists and helping them become successful in doing. It gives me great satisfaction to know that this, you know, project that we're doing has really fostered and sort of been a sort of parallel or a sort of hand in for Mary. And I don't need the accolades for it. I just love that it's possible, right?
And it's fun. We have a good time.
And it's fun,
right?
you know, that it's happening, that, you know, that there's a place where we can be of support and service.
Mm-hmm. I also, Pratt, right? I mean, I work for Pratt. I'm chair of fine arts at Pratt. This is a free program.
Yeah.
This does not bring in revenue. So I think I am very proud to work for an institution that supports this idea. And it's not only for Pratt alumni. It is small by design, but we do think we would love it to be a model that maybe some Pratt Forward participants go to wherever. We had 2 people from Detroit last year go to Detroit, start their own Pratt Forward. Again, with the help of some of these mentors, because, you know, they can leverage their platforms to reach out to institutions in those places that maybe that individual doesn't have access to. So we're thinking of scale in that kind of way, which is also why We are talking to not only Silver Arts, but Joan Mitchell Foundation. It's wonderful to be here at Hauser Wirth because I think it's encouraging to see how many places are now shifting the emphasis. So it seems to be more, and I know, Debbie, you and I have talked about this, that it's a way to say there are people out there doing stuff over time, sustainably, connecting in a real way with communities. What we can offer, I was also talking with an art education person at a museum recently who said, what we want to do is facilitate what you're doing, create a platform for what you're doing. Again, it's a shift in the paradigm, so that's very encouraging to see. And now I think it would be great to hear, to have a chat with you all.
I think I have a question.
Are there any questions? Sorry, I'm coming from behind. Don't be alarmed.
I think I have a question myself.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Raquel Dutois, and I work currently at the kitchen, but I am also a Pratt alum.
We just found that out today.
I just actually want to say bravo, because actually what you are all talking was something that my class talked about in quite vigorous conversations after we graduated, because a lot of us felt, I guess, just lost. And a lot of us just stopped practicing our work. And that was really sad. I currently do continue my practice, but I've had to become an art administrator and to sustain that. And so I'm just very happy that you are all doing that. So I appreciate you.
You'll also be glad to hear that also in our program, and Assistant Chair Dina Weiss is here, who's also doing a lot of work in Pratt. We now have developed a teaching certificate, which is an institute level thing. So we invite alumni back. So this is not something that we're only doing for alumni. We're also thinking about what we have learned from doing Pratt Forward, can now become more embedded in the MFA program. So it's important.
Yeah, it's something we were fortunate to bring this also to Yale just recently, which was really incredible. There were over 56 students we did it online, but they were in present, and then it was incredible, the dialogue we had. So we're really wanting to have this as a core curriculum implemented in the program so that students, and prior to they leave, they sort of just have an awareness and understanding of the basics. For me, one of the things that was very fundamental when the late Holly Block was alive, she used to go, before the AIM program, the Artists in a Marketplace, she would go around to the different institutions, art institutions in the Northeast area, right? And she would go and present this seminar class. And that was my first and only introduction to this other side of it being a business. And I remember that, and I kept the list. And so a lot of what we're doing now is based on my experience with Holly Block, is based on the AIM program as a tool and way in providing access to artists. And up until that point, I didn't even know that I needed to be an LLC or a sole proprietor. Oftentimes there's still this romantic notion about being an artist, of ways in which you're working, but you're not provided the information. And so that was and I just remembered after that, it was only she was only there for 2 weeks, but we weren't given any other information, for when we graduated. We had to just figure it out. But I was so lucky just to have that bit of information that provided me something to move with. And I just remember, sole proprietor, become that. And so, but that protected me. But without that information or knowledge, I think many artists, like you're stating yourself, I know many of my colleagues and peers who are not making art today because it is very challenging to do both. and there's a lack of support in the community. There's a lack of support from galleries who don't necessarily assist with managing studios. There are some great galleries who do that, who help with developing and giving and sending, like, accountants, or just giving this information to artists, but many don't. So many just leave you hanging and to figure it out on your own. And I think it's just really important for us to continue conversation and the awareness of that the ecosystem also consists of the artists being a part of it. And oftentimes when it comes to the ecosystem, we're not talking about the artists, we're talking about everything else. And we forget that there's no art without the artists being a part of it. So we also have to make sure that the artists have the tools that they need to continue doing what they do and what we do best. Is making art, making great art.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Preston Fox. I'm at the Studio Museum of Harlem, and you described building this relationship with curators, and typically there's this pipeline of artist to curator to educator, and I was wondering if you're having conversations with your artists about the conversations they want to have with the public and how to use educators as the tools to really push that conversation forward.
Yes, interesting. I like the way you stated that, because I think we are, but I hadn't thought of putting it in those terms. So I think that's very interesting. And one of the conversations this morning, what always strikes me as well in terms of accessing work, people feeling it's not for me, is that we so often talk about art as something that needs to be translated, the aboutness. And a lot of the time, the conversations that we have both at Pratt Forward and in the studios are, art is also experiential. You can stand in front of a piece of work and you don't have to think. In fact, sometimes it's best to tell yourself, don't think, because I think we are in a very information-heavy world. There is a famous 1969, I think it was, essay by Susan Sontag against interpretation. It is still very, very, very important today. So sometimes I think, it's also giving people permission to actually just be with the work. So in terms of I think, again, the role of the artist also as educator, it is to stand by your process, stand by what motivates you. Because a lot of the time, I think you will say to an artist, how did you decide to do blah, blah? I didn't decide anything. I had a notion. I felt a drive. I went into my studio, I played around, and I don't know how it happened, but here it is. That is valid. In fact, that is really essential that you tell that story, because otherwise you're not really being honest. And also, you are kind of making it to be something it's not, and one of its massive roles in the world. One of the reasons why I think it is artists make meaning, is because of what the work does. And we have this conversation also, especially in a world today where there is so much going on, socially and politically. And I had this conversation yesterday with an artist in their studio. I can't be in here anymore. I need to be out there demonstrating. Okay, that's okay. You can give yourself permission to do that, but you can also give yourself permission for your artistic process to help you process this moment without thinking, and I'm making art with a capital A.
And I think being reminded that art is a vehicle, right? And that vehicle is to bring art to the people, right? And that's often how I think of my impact as an artist. How am I engaging the audience? And how am I creating conversations and new discourses for many people to experience it, to just experience it, to just be able to see themselves and something familiar in it that inspires them, that transform them into doing something incredible for themselves, right? There was one question about the facade of
the space.
This morning, yeah.
Right, this
Intimidating
morning.
facades.
That
yeah.
reminded me of a way in which I wanted to create accessibility for an audience when I did the exhibition at Baltimore Museum, right? I changed the facade, right? It was very important for me to do that because I wanted the people to feel like this was their museum. So I created the facade to look like the row houses that they see every day, that changed the face of the facade. And that's really important for people to feel like, oh, I too am connected to this. I too can enter these spaces. So oftentimes we have to do something as courageous as that to change the museum. This is your responsibility. You want a particular audience in here, then they have to know that they're welcome. They have to know that this is their community. They have to know that you as an institution is a part of their community. And a way in which you do that, you show them that. And so that's what I brought. I said, what we need to do is change the facade, right? Not many museums are willing to do that, right? But Baltimore Museum was willing to do that. And it was up for 2 years longer because of COVID. And they got an even larger audience because of it. And now they're doing all of these incredible programs that they never even thought of doing before within the community. They're also collaborating with other organizations like The Last Resort and all of these other spaces. The Last Resort is ran by Derek Adams and Baltimore. So they're doing all of these in Greenmount Foundation. So now they're in partnership. And so when I think about institutions and partnerships, you think of like art and practice, like with the Hammer in Los Angeles. You think of what LACMA did with, the Underground Museum. You think of all of these institutions. You think of Next Haven with Yale Art Gallery. It's like there's a responsibility with museums to be a part of the community in greater ways.
I know we're running out of time, but there is one thing, because what you said about education and the artist, Mary, putting you on the spot here, I know, but I think this is very important because one of your pivotal works really is saying to the institution, challenging the institution, right? I'm talking about the photograph. Because the institution is perpetuating something, and you as the artist, and I would say you're very much the artist educator in relation to this particular work, are saying, wait a minute, we need to have a conversation about this. Are you able to give a little peek into that, and then people can Google it, because it's too complicated to go into?
Oh, wow. So yeah, a lot of my work is looking at body autonomy. It's looking at mass incarceration, the intersections of reproductive justice, adultification bias, root causes for incarceration for particularly Black girls and women. So I guess very quickly, I'm gonna try to be concise with this. In 2021, I discovered 2 sexually explicit photographs of a prepubescent girl posed as the Odylus that was created by Philadelphia's most famous artist, Thomas Eakins. I found the photo on the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts website, despite the scholarship of Sadia Hartman, Fred Moten, Deb Willis about the violence of the photograph. I downloaded the photograph, I reimagined the photograph, and then I called the community, as well as my peers and the institution to action for some reparative work that centered communal healing and repair. And it's yes, it's in the show, and it's an ongoing campaign for accountability for America's first fine art museum and school, right? The Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So I'm still waiting on this conversation. We'll see.
I'm in awe of how you just encapsulated such a complex thing.
You also want to talk
so
about
quickly.
the documentary?
Oh.
Quickly, the light is flashing.
Just really quick, just go.
Okay. Currently, I just wrapped up a documentary that I guess aligns my work in the vein of Faith Ringgold as being like a Black feminist radical artist championing girls and women. Co-produced by Mickalene Thomas, Julie Moritz. I mean, there's a bunch of powerhouses behind this film, and it'll be to you shortly, hopefully, soon.
you, Jane. Thank you, Mickalene. Thank you, Mary. And the absolutely essential Pratt Forward programme. Incredible, and some really wise words. So thank you all. Don't rush, it's fine. We're just going to have a moment to swap over. Okay, so our final section, section 4, gives me great pleasure to welcome Davinia and Filippa, and OreOluwa is joining us virtually, but we feel her, and we've been corresponding actually since 9 o'clock this morning with her to make sure this was going to work. So this is kind of experimental and rather exciting, because as part of their contribution to the panel, Filippa is actually offering to take some of you out at the end of the day into Once There Was a Mother, the Louise Bourgeois exhibition, for a short activation in the space if you'd like to join her. And I'll remind you of that at the end. So how does a teacher encourage students to make critical connections between professional practices in this, as we've heard already today, this increasingly complex social, political reality that we find ourselves in? And I'm delighted to welcome Davinia, who's assistant professor at Columbia, and Ori as well. And Filippa, who is a public engagement, museum, education and participation professional. And I am going to leave you with them. So when we're ready, we can also start with the film. Thank you.
Welcome. Ori, are you with us? Can you hear us? Yes.
Can you hear me okay? Yes.
Well, for a bunch of academics, we don't have any slides for you today.
Intentionally.
But we have Ori, and we're going to start with the body dialogue. Ori, do you want to start?
I will, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I just want to quickly thank you all for allowing me to be in this space with you, even though my current body is not there. And I'm just grateful to be able to experience this with you. So I'm going to start with a practice that I start all of my classes with, a combination of different body practices that I've come across, as well as the work of Amy Cox, who's a dancer and an anthropologist. So I'm just going to invite all of you to bring your hands together. And we're just going to rub our hands together, create some friction. And in a second, I'm going to invite you to place your hands on a part of your body that you would like to send some love to. Maybe it's a part of your body that you've neglected, a part of your body that is a bit tired. But I'll ask you to release, and we'll take 3 deep breaths together in your own time, in your own breathing practice. And release. Invite you back into this space. We'll do one more. Body dialogue is what I call it. And this time I'm going to ask you to place your hands on a part of your body that you feel most energized right now. We've had a long day of exciting, invigorating conversation. So I want you to think about where you feel that in your body. And we'll create some friction again with our hands. And we'll take 3 deep breaths and release. Wonderful. Thank you so much for engaging in that activity with us. I will pass it back to Filippa and Davinia.
Thank you. Thank you, Ori. Thank you all. We are going to talk about today about all the questions and the issues we've been talking all day.
As we've been hearing everyone speaking, I've been thinking, oh my goodness, we want to speak to that, we want to speak to this, we want to speak to that, because all of the things that we've been writing down and the conversations we've been having, I mean, over the past year, really, but certainly in preparation to this, have chimed with so much of what you've all been saying today. And we hope to be able to do justice to all of the ideas that you've all put forward by talking about what we're going to speak about. Do I give it a spoiler now?
I think it's a great idea to start with the context.
Mm-hmm.
I am a doctoral student candidate, yes, in art museum education at Teachers College.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also a museum educator. And Davinia and Ori have been my professors. I learned so much from them. And the question is, how does this teaching boils down to our gallery practice? How my training is translated to the museum setting and art encounters.
And what we learn from you, and the interdependent relationship that we have developed through the process of working together, and really then how we teach, learn, and lead in this symbiotic, interdependent relationship that comes from previous thought partnerships and relationships, deep relationships that we've created before. So going back to what Angel and José were saying at the very beginning of the day, the role of the friendship in learning and also in sustaining careers, not just as artists, but also as arts administrators. I teach arts administration, and as art educators. What does that bring to our process and our practice in our careers that can also sustain us during this time in this socio-political reality, I think, that we're in. Okay.
I first, it was, I think, spring of 2021 that I took your course in decolonizing art, question mark.
There's the question mark.
A question mark. And it was the framework of that course. It was about trust, vulnerability, and time that I experienced in every single class. And I would like to invite you to share that with all of us today.
I'd be happy to. So, Decolonizing Culture, International Perspectives, was actually a course that came out of another course which has now just been made permanent at Teachers College, Columbia. And that was called Race in the Arts, the Role of the Arts in Racial Capitalism. And it, see people's faces. Right. It's a big course. It's a deep course. And that one is historical, bringing and chronological. It deals with colonialism. It deals with how the West was created in opposition to the rest, and all of these things, and how it created itself in opposition to the rest, all of these things. And then at the end of it, my students, who are mostly from the Arts Administration program, but many students who take the classes from across Columbia and many from art education, asked, well, what do we do? How do we put this into practice? And it's very individual, of course, and it depends where you are. So I created another course called Decolonizing Culture, International Perspectives. And because we were via Zoom, we were working via Zoom, it was 2021, middle of the pandemic. And I was actually shut out of the country by Trump's visa ban. So I was kind of working from the UK via Zoom and then from Barbados while chasing my visa. We zoomed in, or I zoomed in, a number of friends from what I call my trust group, from 6 different countries across the world, talking about their professional practices as art educators, as arts administrators of different kinds, and as academics, and how they have engaged with ideas of decolonization, broadly speaking, breaking down hierarchies between people, and changing the way that we see knowledge in different environments. And I sat and I listened to them, and I allowed the students to do the same. But at the core of that course was that relationship, the time-honored relationship that each of us had created between ourselves. And I introduced each person with a slide that was very vulnerable, that showed our friendship, like a picnic of us, I don't know, a slide of a picnic 10 years ago or something, the selfies, to show that part of the relationship, the fun, the bonding, is really important in thought partnerships. And the reason that this, and Filippa actually said at the time, that was my favorite part of the course. That was theory, and it was theory as liberatory practice, as Bell Hooks says. So I think the reason, where am I? The reason we did that was because I had started, when I was doing my doctorate, I think it was 2016, Trump had just been voted in and Brexit had just happened, and I was in the UK, and I said to my advisor, I don't know where I am. I'm a first generation university grad, and now I'm doing a doctorate, and nobody's listening to my voice. I'm writing about race, and people, I feel like I'm gaslit all the time by the media, by people around me, and I don't know where I stand with this or the direction I should go in next. And she said, you know what? You find your people within the institution and within other institutions. Find your people and think with them, read with them and think with them. And I started a reading group, which was naively probably called Friends in Theory. It was a theory reading group, of course. And there were 9 of us. And we started, and it reminded me of what somebody said earlier about the value of, I think it was you, Adjoa. It was the value of dealing with difficult topics together while looking at something else, through looking at something else, right? And it was looking at theory, but what we really did, because that only ran for a year, we solidified these relationships, these friendships and these thought partnerships that have sustained our practices and our ways of practicing, teaching, learning, and leading across the world. So we came together to teach the students this, and I formed a series of groups with the students. So as well as them learning from my friends and colleagues in different geographical contexts and professional practices, they were learning how to create solidarity among themselves in this messy, experimental way that for some groups worked and some groups didn't. I don't know, and being very honest, if I would do that again, because you can't manufacture trust, right? But for Filippa's group, it worked. And we'll talk about that.
I did. Do you feel I should I should share some thoughts on that too? It was a fascinating class, and for academia, it's not quite often that you have this visceral, embodied experience. And Davinia showed up in class, well, on Zoom, but every time, vulnerable, embracing messiness, uncertainty, discomfort. We'll talk about that. In a safe way. And through my work, which is about body-based pedagogies in museums, it was fascinating to see how this can be done in academia, which is another institution that is very rigid. There are very specific ways to exist and navigate the space. But she was there, she was doing it, and it was very inspirational to me to build more and expand my work I'm doing in museums. I'll go on details soon. You want to add something? Go for it.
And I think that the vulnerability actually that we talk about, that was the messiness. The reason I bring it to this is because the way that it worked, the situation in which it worked, was not necessarily in the class. It was in the relationships that were built afterwards. And that was what I was trying to explain. And that was what I was trying to explain to the students in the class about the friendships or the thought partnerships that I had built with the people who were presenting or sharing their practices. That the thing that had created the information they were sharing and the practices that the students were so inspired by was in large part, that very thinking together in these vulnerable terms that was sometimes painful, a lot of the time stressful, but we stuck with it. And it seems incredibly obvious, right? But somehow it wasn't, and I don't mean trust vulnerability in time to be a formula, but it seemed to me to be the key kind of crystals at the core of those relationships that have brought us to where we are and have us thinking in the ways that we do, and sustain the thought in the ways that we think, sustain the ways we think within neoliberal organizations or institutions that can really work to destroy that.
And the framework felt like a lived experience, not a theoretical, abstract, on paper kind of thing. We lived through it, and it was difficult at times. So it is hard to choose the training you're gonna have, but this is also a political act as a student, if I say so myself. And I was looking for courses that are more critical. I was looking for thinkers in Teachers College that would inform my practice. And that's how I found Ori, who was showing up in class every time, giving space, creating safe space to everybody to share. There was no hierarchy of I know more, you know less. It was about I know different. And she was consistent. And this is something that we feel, and we talk about feelings and how valid are. But yes, that was my feeling that we were learning every time in a different way. And I think it's the perfect time for Yori to share your point of views, your processes, and your work.
Thank you so much. I almost got lost as a participant. I was so enthralled with what you were sharing, both Davinia and Filippa. And I'm a participant, right, in this. And I think what I want to do is just, highlight this course that Filippa was talking about, and talk about it in relation to this framework or this guiding post, right? So as Davinia, you were saying, this isn't a formula, but thinking about trust, vulnerability, and time, and how they interact with one another. So the course I taught was called The Body as Context, Implications for Teaching and Learning with the Land. And I'm an ethnographer, and I focus a lot on inquiry-based learning and teaching and research. And so the question that was at the heart of the course was, what can our bodies remember and reimagine about our relationship with the land? So I'll give a little backstory for that. My work is with youth and communities of color who are involved in urban agriculture and the sort of environmental justice, ecological justice initiatives that they're a part of. That's where the film that you watched at the beginning of this panel came from my dissertation fieldwork, as well as a collaboration with my dear friend and colleague, the filmmaker, Natasha Cohen-Carroll. And coming to that aspect, to the work around relationship building, I met Natasha at a dance class. I'm a dancer, this space, this practice informs my teaching and my research. And it was through sort of a intentional and long-lasting, right, time-honored experience with this incredible person who's my friend, but also has these other skill sets that we're able to put that film together that became part of my dissertation. My dissertation work informs this course, which Filippa was a part of. And I want to talk a little bit about this partnership, right? How we even came to this panel. It's noticeable that I'm not with you right now. And I was supposed to be with you, but rather unexpectedly, I had to get a surgery for a meniscus tear. I'm doing fine. I am in recovery, but I wanted to bring that up because I think it speaks to the ways that this partnership, as soon as I told Filippa and Davinia, I said, listen, maybe I set this one out, and that was not even considered. That was given no air, no oxygen. It was about how do we bring this still to fruition in a different modality. And I also here just want to shout out the organizing and AV team, Henny and Marissa and Benny and everyone involved for helping to make this possible. But I think, you know, it's the partnership that we had created in our course, Filippa, the partnership that then was able to be expanded beyond the walls of the course, and bring, and, you know, Filippa is the one who introduced Davinia and we see the parallels in our work, even though they're different scopes of research, different scopes of education. And so I think it's just important to understand that even though none of this was planned, I did not see this coming, you know, when I first entered this space, being open and responsive and vulnerable to that process. And I think coming to the course itself, how I designed the course, and how I saw myself as I think earlier as well, and it might have been you, Adjoa, who was talking about Paulo Freire and a complicated relationship with some of the precepts of that work, but thinking as our work as facilitators. Also drawing, my work is arts-based, it's body-based, and so thinking about, you know, Augusto Boal in that space as well, thinking about what the body can tell us about how power operates, what performance can tell us about how power operates. So even though there wasn't a hierarchy, as Filippa was saying, in knowledge that was valued, but I also had to understand my role as a facilitator to protect students, to protect the space in ways that made them comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And recognizing how power imbalances can inform who gets to be comfortable and who doesn't have to be uncomfortable in some spaces. And so for me, that framework, that trust, vulnerability, and time, even though it operated in different ways, and again, centering the body, how the body can open up avenues for those themes in a classroom, for me, that was a really big part of the conversation.
Thank you, Ori. So how does this all reaches the Art Museum Gallery? So when I'm talking, my work and research are on body-based pedagogies, and I have to clarify that it's not about posing or taking a pose or making a fun skit in front of an artwork. It's more than that. It's another layer. It's not either or. It's another layer on a dialogue. It doesn't work for every single work of art. There are works of art that we need information. They're political. We need the context. We need to amplify the artist's voice. But the way I see body-based pedagogies in spaces and the visitors' bodies have two important tenets. Well, there are more, but I'm going to share two with you today. One is that the body is a site of wisdom, but also is a site where culture is played out. And the way we lead, the way we exist in museums, and what educators do translates and penetrates every single aspect of the museum, which then translates to the question, well, if you're a museum educator, who are you? What is your positionality? What do you bring? What are the people right now in the room? Who are they? And these questions are not just a cognitive process to answer. These responses go through the body. We need to pay attention to emotions, to feelings, to sensations, to comfort and discomfort when we are safe. But in order, as an educators, to invite people to do that, we have to reflect on our own positionality. And I learned that in your course, of course. Do you want to talk more about it, please?
Only to say that you've been speaking about museum educators, and many people today have been speaking about artists. I had a different group of people in my class. most of my students are very business focused, and I needed to bring these, I need to still bring these ideas of the importance of not just the interpersonal, not just connection, but real deep and time-honored relationships to what they do. The importance of listening, and the importance of exactly what we were talking about, trust, vulnerability, and time. So I don't know, I was driven by, and I don't know if this is the time that we were going to say it, by a poem, and I think, not driven by, but we spoke about it in class, and I think it ties together what the three of us have spoken about. And I know that many of you will know it, but it's The Welder by Sherry Moraga. So I will read that. I think it ties together what we've been saying. So it says, I am a welder, not an alchemist. I'm interested in the blend of common elements to make a common thing. No magic here, only the heat of my desire to fuse what I already know exists is possible. We plead to each other, we all come from the same rock. We all come from the same rock, ignoring the fact that we bend at different temperatures and that each of us is malleable up to a point. Yes, fusion is possible, but only if things get hot enough. All else is temporary adhesion, patching up. It is the intimacy of steel melting into steel, the fire of your individual passion to take hold of ourselves that makes sculpture of your lives, builds buildings. And I'm not talking about skyscrapers, hello New York, merely structures that can support us without fear of trembling. For too long a time, the heat of my heavy hands has been smouldering in the pockets of other people's business. They need oxygen to make fire, which reminds me of Ori's body dialogue. I'm now coming up for air, yes. I'm picking up the torch. I am the welder. I understand the capacity of heat to change the shape of things. I am suited to work within the realm of sparks, out of control. I am the welder. I'm taking the power into my own hands. We started that. We started the class with that. And we spoke then about the ideas of anti-colonial ideas or decolonization in those terms, in the terms of practice, in the terms of connecting people, but it's not just connection. It's that heat that welds people together. And we spoke about that as the antithesis of DEI or diversity policy in practice, which would be the practice of taking cold lumps of metal, sticking them together in the same room and saying, you now are one. Just become one, okay? We needed to heat things up. And that was an uncomfortable process. And I learned that what I needed to probably do was figure out how we bring the right people into the room, but how we get people at the right starting point to be able to handle the heat. And that's where I went from there with the course. But definitely in terms of the way that the three of us work together, it is that welding, isn't it?
Yeah. And I remember the way you shared the poem. Mm-hmm. You had recorded your voice, and I was listening to it, and my son was like, Mom, can I hear it again? And we were listening it on repeat.
And you know, I was living next to a building site during the pandemic, so I just leaned out of the window and I had all the sounds like the welder.
There was that, yes. It was an art piece. Yeah. I mean, it was beautiful, but also so true. I'm thinking also how all these sharing and openness and willingness to do mistakes without hurting other people was also a value that I experienced in Ori's class, and how this created a community. A very simple example was that she created, what was the name, Ori? Community document? Collective thinking, collective.
Almost, collective memory.
Ah, so close. But it was, in actuality, it was a place on a Google document that we could all share ideas and thoughts and collectively build on each other's moments, understandings, and ways of being, really. And I lost my thinking, but I wanted to ask you, Ori, if during your teaching, all these decisions changed or made you improvise, add things, adjust. How was that for you?
The short answer is yes, but I will expand a little bit. And I think I'm going to focus on 3 words that you said. The first, you started off with play and playfulness, and then bringing in the collective memory documents. I'll talk about that. And then third, which I don't know if you already knew, you caught on my wavelengths, but I was going to talk about improvisation, because I think that's a piece of both of those, the first 2. So I'll start with improvisation just because I think something that's been really useful for me, why my dancer sensibilities and my embodied practice is helpful as I'm entering into spaces where I'm the researcher, I'm the educator, I'm the scholar, is because when you are collectively moving with others, especially when you're improvising with others, for me, there's no way you can rationalize the idea that sort of intellect exists just in your brain, in yourself, in your own individual brain, because when instantaneously your body is moving in response to somebody and you can't even think about consciously how that's happening, people who've done, musicologists who've done work with jazz musicians and other sorts of other artists who improvise say the same thing. You can't think of ideas or intellect as something that is nicely packaged in everyone's individual brain, and then it gets transferred from here to here to here in a way that's very linear. So I thought about that a lot in the course, and how I could create structures that meant people knew how, had something to work with, because I also think just saying do whatever you want is not necessarily always helpful, and it can be disorienting. But how do you create structures that are malleable? So this, the collective memory document, and as Filippa was saying, it's not anything innovative. It's a Google Doc, right? And my work is my PhD's in literacy studies, critical literacy studies, and thinking about the multimodality of written text. So not thinking about text as something that is static and not living. I'm interested in how the body as context. That was my course, right? How bodies interact with text and vice versa. So having a way for people to engage with this document that was living, sometimes I would change the format based off of, Filippa, you had actually brought in there's a space where people could bring in other resources that I hadn't provided on a topic, and also multimodal resources, so films or, podcasts, whatever it is, and being able to change the format of the document based off of what students were offering. The format I brought in was also changed based off past students, right? So how does this document come into life? And the second piece of that is memory. How do we not think of memory as something that needs to be captured and accessed in like a pure form, in a pure kind of linear form? There's this really lovely interview Toni Morrison did, I think, in the late 80s, where she talks about memory being able to come in and sit across from you at the table, right? So when she's writing the characters in her books, as well as she is activating her memory as she's writing, it's something that you're constantly in conversation with, and something that's embodied and something that's collective. So I was really attuned to how we could use that document, not as just something to dump a bunch of stuff, but to really kind of track and look at progress in our thinking, as well as come back to it. And you did it in a really lovely way, Filippa. Each student had an inquiry project. So I was teaching a seminar, which is about sort of dialogic, exploration. And so I didn't assign a sort of standard project for everybody. I everyone had inquiry questions, that they were using the resources in my course to help them further. And Filippa just did an incredible job of using that collective memory document and bringing it into space. We went to the studio space, and you sort of took us on this journey, and people were able to hear not just what I had said, right, but you had been taking notes throughout the year on what your classmates were saying. So that hierarchy, again, is displaced. Even though in that moment you were the expert, right? You were taking us through your journey, and we were there to go along with you, but you were bringing all of us into that. So yes, I think I'm gonna wrap up there because there's lots of other wonderful things to say. But I'll pass the mic back to you, Filippa.
I have so much to say. I bet you do too.
We have conversations afterwards.
We can. Oh yes, we're not stopping. But all these values as a student that I experience in your classes, the work that I've been reading, Rika's work, Adjoa, your storytelling in the galleries, what can we say? Olga Hubbard work. She had a conflict. She wanted to be in the room, but
she's her PhD advisor.
Yes. I'm building on this work, and it is a privilege to be in that institution and learning with all these people. And
at the same time, we're aware of the limitations of the institution and keeping the knowledge within the institution. And this is why I was so inspired by the Pratt Forward talk. So thinking about how do we do that, me as a new and pre-tenured professor, I'm being really careful, but thinking about the Race and the Arts course, the next step is to bring that reading group. It's not going to be called In Friends in Theory this time, but make it a public thing. And so next semester, Filippa's joining me as TA, and we're going to have the reading group that runs along, the Race and the Arts reading group that's open to the public that runs alongside the course. And that enables the knowledge to be disseminated more, not even, I hate that, knowledge being disseminated more widely. It's the institutional language again, right? But the sharing to be opened out.
I wrote, I see the time, Debbie. But I wrote an essay 2 semesters ago about positionality and the body and art museum education.
Yeah.
And for an academic to choose to do so in a non-peer-reviewed journal is not a wise move. But I wanted to, what I gained from my experiences to be accessible to everybody. And I received emails, texts on Instagram from educators and museum leaders across the world having these very questions of how do we do it? Like, seriously, but how do I do it? And while we don't have the time, but even if we had, there is not a formula to do it, but it's worth asking ourselves, if I'm comfortable, what does this mean? Am I on the right way? Am I doing the work? So we have 2 more minutes. Do you want to wrap it up?
Open it out. I'd say open it out.
Okay, let's do that.
Let's have
all questions.
Voices.
We love that.
Hello. I think we
Do you
have a
want
question here.
Okay.
Oops. We have one here and then one up there. Drew, yes.
Ori, do you see the audience? Just a little bit. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ilk. I'm a museum educator, and I also teach at NYU. I've learned so much from my students, and I try to run a space that is non-hierarchical at best. Coalitions are really important, whether it's conversations around anti-Blackness in museums, colonial policies, procedures, settler colonialism, carcerality. These are all things that I think our society is contending with, and if you're not, you should be. But what is something that you've all had to unlearn as you are learning new things? There's only so big that our plates are. I don't like to be defensive, but I get defensive because I'm a human being living in America. I have to be defensive because this is a terrible place sometimes. So what are you all unlearning in your academic spaces and in these spaces, because it's complicated, because young people are built better and different to us?
Well, I had a very difficult conversation this week. I did a lot of crying. This conversation was within my institution for a topic and a matter that I care about. But in the email exchange, which was very dense, I will say, I embraced my emotions and all the process. I let it be. And I made clear how I felt, and that my feelings and my experience and the other person's experiences are equally valid. So it's not about a copy-paste of an institutional text and policy. It's about human beings and how we feel and how we navigate this together, honoring our feelings and our relationship and what we believe in. It was not an easy thing to do. Lots of crying, lots of breaking stuff in the household. But it's a process. And the things I've unlearned, we need 5 days. And they're not going to be enough.
I think I've been doing a lot of learning. Learning about this context. So I arrived here in 2022, January. I've been sitting and learning. I've been learning about what my body means here as a Black woman, and what that means in opposition to sometimes my accent, how all of that plays into this colonial history, and how I relate to students given all of this. And I've just been doing a lot of listening. It's one of the reasons why, when I considered coming here today to do this, I thought, let's bring Filippa. She's not a student, she's a candidate, she's a researcher. That's the institution again. She's an individual in her own right who has synthesized, alongside the knowledge that I have shared, multiple knowledges to create this world of her own that she's, I don't know, so adeptly sort of sharing with everybody. And each of the students are doing that. I am learning to listen to them and work out what they need. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question back here.
Ori, do you want to add something?
I'd rather hear the next question, so that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Hello, my name is Drew Reynolds. I am a teaching artist at the Brooklyn Museum, and I'm a master's student at Teachers College with Filippa. And I guess as sort of a emerging professional that is sort of engaged in more transgressive work in these spaces, I wonder, how do you all sustain this work when you come up against like the vanguards of these institutions, whether they be in academia or in museums themselves? Like, how do you keep propelling yourself forward and not just like jumping ship and going somewhere else?
Somatic therapy. A long walk, a supportive community, a partner, and asking for help when you need it.
That last part is hard.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Everything that Filippa said, and then, honing in on the partnership. I think something that's come up in our conversation quite a bit is the importance of collectivity. Davinia, you were speaking about finding your people, but just in practical terms, I think one of the most destructive things that academia does in many senses is convince us that like scholarship or knowledge production is individual, right? You write your dissertation by yourself. You do these things by yourself, and that's just not necessary. Even with, as you said, there are these sort of guardrails that have been posted up. But I think for me, not knowing when these distinctions, disciplinary, industry, creative, like distinctions or disciplines, when they're necessary to separate and when they're not. There's a really lovely quote by Nancy Mears that talks about not distinguishing between creative or critical writing or work, because somebody benefits when you say, this is me as a critical thinker and this is me as a creative thinker. Why are they separate in the first place? So I wrote my dissertation with a bunch of playwrights and people who wrote screenwriters as well, because it was a reminder that this was something that writing can be collective and writing can be interdisciplinary. And I can talk a lot about how difficult it was, and as you said, the powers, the instantiated powers that might thwart some of those initiatives. But I do think reminding yourself of the collectivity, finding your people, and finding practical ways to practice that in everyday situations, I think is helpful.
Just finish by saying yes. That creates a bubble of protection around you while you're in the institution and you're passing through. So as a student, you're passing through, and these classes, these spaces, these moments are created as bubbles to try to cushion you as you go through, so that you can come out relatively unscathed and do the work you need to do.
Ari, Davinia, Filippa. That was quite a privilege to sit and listen to such an insightful and personal experience that you shared so eloquently. I'm sure everyone agrees with me. I feel absolutely, privileged to, and how generous of you to share that with us all. Thank you.
Thank you for creating the space. Yes. Thank you. I think everyone would agree.
Academics.
Creating the space.
We'll take it. They're rolling out.
From one to another.
Yes.
Right. Artists and innovators, and what a insightful day we've had. And I want to say thank you to everyone. So not just Ari, Filippa, and Davinia, but to Jane, Mickalene, Mary, to Adjoa, Rika, Angel, José. Thank you all so much. This is we've been on a huge journey today, and we've raised so much. This will not be the end. We can carry on talking outside this room. I know you're desperate to get out now. We've had enough. But we can take this conversation into the Rothbar. I want to say thank you to our online viewers. They've stuck with us all day, and we really, want to reach out to you, and it's testament to, including Ori, how successful that can be. So please to continue to communicate with us. This topic is huge. We've been over and addressed so much, but okay. So I hope we can stay in touch, and I hope we can continue this conversation. It's really valid, really important, and just so delightful, actually, to be perfectly honest, to hear the amazing work that everybody's doing around, within, part of, and alongside the wonderful work that our artists make. Thank you all. A big thank you to Marissa, who's masterminded the day brilliantly. And Henny, our learning assistant behind the scenes, who you cannot see. She's next door. And to Manuela, with all of our thanks at Hauser Wirth for all that you do to make this happen here. I am going to invite you all to go next door to have a drink. Do not forget, we have an amazing invitation for an activation in the space just short with Filippa, if you'd like to join her in the Editions Gallery next door as well. Thank you all very much.